Ruin risk beats average return. You could spend a decade making smart moves, winning small battles, climbing steadily, and then one bad bet wipes it all away. That is the thing nobody tells you when they brag about their 8% annual returns or their bold, calculated risks. It does not matter if you averaged brilliance if you are not around to enjoy it. A single catastrophic decision can end the game before you know it started. Think about it in your own life. You save aggressively for 5 years, build real security, then one night you gamble with your job, your relationship, or your savings on something that feels exciting and urgent. The odds seemed okay. The potential was huge. But the downside, the real downside you did not want to name, was total collapse. That is ruin risk, not the risk of losing money, the risk of losing the game itself. The mental rule is sharper than it sounds. Always make decisions where your worst case scenario is still survivable, not comfortable, survivable. This flips how most people think. They chase the biggest possible win and rationalize away the worst possible loss because it feels unlikely. But unlikely things happen. Someone gets sick, a business tanks, a friend betrays you, and if the worst case destroys everything you built, you were never actually ahead. You were just lucky. The people 10 steps ahead do not think about winning more. They think about not losing catastrophically. They say no to opportunities that are seductive but could break them. They build buffers, they hedge, they move slower, but keep moving. The average return means nothing if ruin comes first. Opportunity cost is invisible. You say yes to the networking lunch and feel like you're making a smart move. What you don't see is the 3-hour focus block that just vanished, the one where you'd have finished that side project or learned that skill. Your brain shows you what you gained. It hides what you gave up. That's the trap. Every choice you make is also a choice you don't make, and your mind will never scream about the second one. You spent the afternoon doom scrolling because it felt good in the moment. What died in that time? A chapter in your book, a conversation with someone who matters, a walk that would have cleared your head. The coffee date felt real and immediate. The lost writing time felt abstract, hypothetical, doesn't exist. This is why successful people can seem weirdly ruthless about their time. They've learned to see the ghost of what they're sacrificing. They visualize the opportunity cost before they say yes, not to feel guilty, but to make conscious trades instead of unconscious ones. Start doing this small. Before you commit to something, ask what you're actually killing to make room for it, not in a paranoid way, just honest. Some things are worth it. A night out with old friends, worth it. Scrolling your feed for the 100th time, probably not. The people who pull ahead aren't smarter or luckier. They're just better at seeing the invisible costs before the decision lands. They know that everything you're doing is something you're not doing, and they protect their attention like it's real currency, because it is. And unlike money, you can't earn more of it. Inversion before ambition. Most people wake up asking, "What do I want?" and stop there. The sharper move is flipping the question first. What do I want to avoid? You're in a conversation about a new job, more money, better title, growth potential, making your chest feel light. But before you say yes, invert it. What breaks under this deal? A boss who micromanages, a commute that hollows out your mornings, a team culture that looks polished in interviews but feels hollow once you're there. Suddenly, you're not chasing the dream, you're dodging the trap. Our brains are architects of shiny things. Ambition feels clean, feels like momentum, feels like proof you're moving forward. but it's also the exact mechanism that lands people in situations they resent, wearing the credentials they wanted 5 years ago while their bodies break down or their relationships turn quiet. Inversion is unglamorous. It's the opposite of a vision board. You're studying the wreckage instead. You're asking what sinks the people around you, what habits destroy their health, what partnerships metastasize into resentment, what opportunities are actually time thieves dressed up as progress. The moment you know what sinks ships, you navigate differently. You make moves not because something glitters, but because you've already audited the worst-case outcomes. You say, no faster. You spot warning signs others waltz past. You protect the life you have before chasing the one you imagine. The best part? This takes one genuine 10-minute conversation before any big decision. Ask what failure looks like. Ask what the worst day would feel like. Not to paralyze yourself, to inoculate yourself. Ambition without inversion is just a blindfold with a marketing team. Second-order consequences. Most people move through decisions like a chess player who only sees the piece they can capture right now. You stay late at work and feel the rush of praise. Win. You skip the gym because exhaustion is talking louder than discipline. Relief floods in. You finally buy the thing that's been sitting in your cart. Instant happiness. But the people who quietly build real advantage, they've trained themselves to ask the question that most brains actively dodge. And then what? Not rhetorical. Actually, then what happens next? Staying late doesn't just earn you a nod from your boss tomorrow. It erodes sleep, sharpens your irritability, and quietly builds resentment in your most important relationships. The relief of skipping the gym doesn't end at bedtime. It becomes a pattern, and patterns harden into identity. That purchase, the dopamine spike, is real, but 6 weeks later, the credit card bill arrives and steals your calm for weeks. The real skill is learning to trace the invisible dominoes. The second move, the third. What happens after that good feeling wears off? What small cost compounds into something you can't ignore? A mentor once told me that wisdom is mostly just seeing 2 moves ahead when everyone else sees one. You don't need to be psychic. Just add a single layer to your thinking. What does this choice actually cost me in 6 weeks, not 6 minutes? What about 6 months? What breaks downstream that won't show up in tomorrow's mood? People who do this almost accidentally end up ahead, not smarter, just playing an entirely different game. They see the trap before they step in it. Asymmetric bet sizing. You walk into a used bookstore and see a hardcover you've wanted for 3 years, priced at $5. You don't hesitate, you buy it. Then you see a lottery ticket for $1 with a 1 in a million shot at 50,000. You pass. Most people see these as separate decisions. They're not. You just did asymmetric bet sizing without knowing it. Here's the pattern. You risked $5 to gain something worth way more to you personally. You refuse to risk $1 for a tiny chance at a huge payout. That's the logic underneath. In betting, in career moves, in relationships, the math that separates people who get ahead is this. You size your risk by how much you can afford to lose, not by how much you might win. Most people reverse it entirely. They go all in on lottery tickets, the startup they can't afford to lose, and pinch pennies on no-lose bets. The boss conversation that could change everything. They're reckless with the needle in a haystack chance and terrified of the sure thing. Watch yourself for a week. Where do you throw small amounts at impossibly big dreams? Where do you underinvest in odds you actually understand? The 10 steps ahead move flips this completely. Make your small bets on things where you know the odds are favorable, even if the upside looks modest on paper. Let bigger bets stay tiny until you've proven you actually understand the game. Your job isn't finding one moonshot. It's staying in the game long enough to compound small wins into something real. That's how staying power actually works. Optionality over prediction. The person who predicts the market correctly once is celebrated. The person who keeps options open when the market moves in any direction is quietly rich. That gap between being right and staying alive is where most people miss their own advantage. You cannot predict which job market will boom in 5 years, which relationship will crater, which skill will become worthless, but you can build a life where none of those surprises destroy you. Think of your actual day. You probably locked yourself into a career path, a city, a set of expertise, then spent energy hoping you guessed correctly. The alternative is weirder but lighter. It means taking the job that teaches you 3 different things instead of the one with the highest title. It means living somewhere affordable enough that you could walk away. It means building skills that translate writing, listening, negotiating, problem solving, instead of betting everything on one narrow expertise that might vanish. The trap is that optionality feels like fence sitting. It looks like you're not committed. In reality, you're committing to something harder, staying flexible while other people ossify around a single bet. The investor who keeps cash doesn't know what he's buying next, but he's the one who can move when opportunity actually arrives. Most people are too locked in to recognize it. So here's the reframe. Optionality isn't indecision. It's insurance against being wrong about the future, and you will be wrong. The move is to stop predicting which card the dealer will flip and instead make sure you can win with any card that lands. Barbell risk allocation. Most people spread their risk like butter across toast, a little here, a little there, always playing it medium. But that strategy keeps you medium too. Nassim Taleb's barbell idea flips the script. Put a chunk of your energy, money, or attention in ultra-safe bets, and put another chunk in wild, explosive ones. Leave almost nothing in the mushy middle. You keep your base stable so you can afford to fail on the edges. A stable job funds your side business that might become nothing or might become everything. You read 90% boring foundational stuff and 10% cutting-edge risk. Your portfolio is mostly boring index funds and some tiny, high-upside plays that could crater and you'd survive it. The magic is that the small wins on the high-risk side compound, while the downside is capped by your barbell. You're not gambling your rent money on crypto, you're gambling the money you already mentally lost. Meanwhile, the person spreading risk evenly across 5 mediocre opportunities catches fire at none of them. They stay stuck in the gray zone where failure still hurts, but wins barely register. The psychological shift matters too. Knowing you have a fortress base makes you braver on the edge. You stop second-guessing the wild bet because you know the boring stuff has your back. This isn't recklessness, it's rational conviction built on structure. Right now, most people live in the middle, exhausted from spreading themselves so thin they feel the pain of every loss without the thrill of any real win. Are you everywhere or are you polarized? Skin in the game filter. You get advice constantly from coworkers, family, that guy at the bar, TikTok experts, people who've never failed at anything. Most of it is free, which is exactly why it costs you everything. Here's the move. Before you listen to anyone, ask yourself one question. What do they lose if they're wrong? A startup founder telling you how to raise capital has skin in the game. A venture capitalist who made 10 bad bets and still has another fund has skin in the game. But a pundit who profits from clicks if you panic, or a friend who benefits socially from you staying stuck with them, or a guru selling a course, they have skin in the opposite game. They win whether your life improves or not. The filter works like this. The more someone insists their advice is timeless truth, the less likely they've actually risked anything on it. Real conviction shows up differently. It's quiet. It's specific to your situation, not universal. It often includes what could go wrong. People with real skin in the game don't need to convince you because they're too busy managing their own downside. That's the difference between someone protecting an idea and someone protecting a future. So, when you're standing at a decision point, mentally separate the advice givers by what they actually risk. Weight the ones with the most to lose if they steer you wrong, the ones who bleed when the bet goes sideways. That single question about who actually loses cuts through more noise than 1,000 hours of fact-checking ever will, because it separates the people talking from the people committing. Follow the incentive, not the argument. Watch what someone is willing to stake on an idea, not what they're willing to say about it. A colleague insists the new process is better for everyone, but their bonus depends on you adopting it. Your friend swears a diet works because science, but they sell the supplements. A news outlet hammers home why a policy is obviously right, but their ad revenue climbs when you stay engaged and angry. Arguments are cheap. Anyone can make one sound good. You can construct a plausible case for almost anything if you spend enough time on it. But incentives are what people actually live by. They reveal what someone believes strongly enough to bet their livelihood, reputation, or peace of mind on. The best manipulators often don't feel like they're lying because their incentive is real to them. They've simply shaped their vision of the world to match what benefits them most. So here's the move. Before you let an argument change how you think, ask who wins if it's true. Ask what shifts in their life when you say yes. Most importantly, ask whether they'd make the exact same case if nobody paid them, nobody watched, and nobody cared. You'll be shocked how many arguments fall apart under that weight. The ones that actually survive, the ones where their incentive runs opposite to what they're claiming, those few are worth your full attention. That's where the truth usually hides. Start listening this way without announcing it. Just quietly notice the shape of who benefits and what they gain. It changes everything about how you move through the world. Goodhart's metric, corruption. You hire a sales team and promise bonuses for call volume. Within weeks, they're dialing the same person 17 times a day. The metrics soar. Your revenue craters. What you've stumbled into is Goodhart's law. The moment you turn something measurable into the goal itself, it stops being true. The measure corrupts. When you optimize for a number, people stop doing what actually matters and start chasing the scoreboard instead. Watch it spread. Teachers teaching to test scores instead of thinking, fitness trackers counting steps while people walk in circles at home, managers tracking hours logged instead of work shipped. It feels productive because the corruption looks like progress. Dashboards turn green, targets hit, everyone cheers. You've accidentally optimized for the display, not the underlying reality. The real thing you cared about, revenue, learning, health, output, vanishes beneath layers of reporting and noise. Here's where you pull ahead. The moment you set a metric, bet that someone will game it within 90 days. Plan now for what you'll measure when that breaks. Better still, rotate your metrics constantly so no single number becomes sacred. The teams that actually move the needle stay paranoid about their own dashboards, asking constantly, is this still real, or am I just watching numbers climb while the actual world stalls? That refusal to trust your own scoreboard, that restless skepticism about your own success, is what separates people building real things from those trapped in the beautiful illusion of hitting targets. Cobra Effect incentives. There's a story from colonial India where the British offered a bounty for dead cobras, trying to reduce the snake population. Simple incentive, right? People started breeding cobras to kill them and collect the reward. When the British caught on and canceled the bounty, all those cobra breeders released their snakes into the wild. The population exploded. They achieved the exact opposite of what they wanted by accidentally rewarding the behavior they were trying to stop. This happens everywhere once you start looking. Your company offers a metric-based bonus, so your team games the metric instead of doing real work. A school rewards test scores, and teachers teach to the test instead of actual learning. A diet counts calories, so you eat less but worse food. The incentive looked good on paper. The behavior it actually triggered was poison. The trap is this. Humans are absurdly good at finding the loophole in what you're measuring, not the spirit of what you wanted. We optimize for the scoreboard, not the goal. And the weirder part, we do this without even realizing it. You set a rule, we find the exception. You reward A, we deliver A while destroying B. The move, when you're designing an incentive, at work, at home, for yourself, pause and ask, what's the perverse version of success here? What would someone do if they only cared about the metric and nothing else? If the answer is ugly, you haven't finished designing the rule yet. The best incentives reward what you actually want, not just what you can easily count. Principal agent misalignment. Your therapist has a financial incentive to keep you coming back. Your doctor benefits more from ordering tests than ruling things out. Your car mechanic gets paid by the hour, not by how fast he fixes you. None of these people are necessarily evil. They just live in a structure where their interests quietly diverge from yours, and most won't even notice it happening. That gap is principal agent misalignment, and it's everywhere. You are the principal, the one who wants a real outcome. They are the agent hired to act on your behalf. The trouble starts when their paycheck rewards something different than what you actually need. A real estate agent sells faster if they push you toward an overpriced house. A financial advisor keeps your money longer in managed funds than in low-cost index funds. A software company makes more by getting you addicted than by solving your actual problem. Here's what makes this particularly slippery. The agent doesn't have to be lying. They can genuinely believe they're helping while operating inside incentives that benefit them more. So you can't just trust good intentions or a warm smile. Instead, start asking one sharp question before you hire anyone or take advice. What are they paid for? And is that the same as what I need? Then, this is crucial. Watch what they actually do, not what they say. Their actions reveal their real incentives faster than any conversation will. That awareness alone puts you miles ahead because most people never even glance behind the curtain. The real power move, follow the money, always. It's a simple radar, and it works. Base rates beat vivid stories. You hear about a plane crash on the news, and suddenly you're nervous flying next week. You read one horror story about a supplement, and you're convinced it's poison. Your friend tells you they made a fortune day trading, and now you're downloading an app. What's happening is your brain is treating the most memorable thing as the most likely thing, when really it should be checking what actually happens most of the time. The base rate is just that. What happens in the general population, the boring statistical truth. A plane crash is unforgettable because it's rare. Flying is statistically safer than driving, but you don't feel fear about your commute. That's the gap between vivid and true. When you make decisions based on the story rather than the rate, you're essentially gambling against the house. Think of a job interview where one candidate had a dramatic startup failure they speak about passionately, while another quietly built 3 successful businesses. The vivid story grabs you, but the numbers whisper, people who have succeeded before tend to succeed again. Here's the move. Before you believe something matters, ask what percentage of people actually experience it. What does the data say happens? Not what's the most memorable case you've heard. The trick is that vivid stories feel like evidence when they're really just theater. Your attention gets hijacked by drama while the actual pattern hides in plain sight. The person who learns to ignore the applause and check the scoreboard makes better bets about everything: jobs, health, money, relationships. Your brain wants the narrative. Your future self wants accuracy. Survivorship bias in advice. The billionaire tells you to wake at 5. The Navy SEAL swears by suffering. The startup founder says ignore everyone's doubts. All 3 survived, and your brain locks onto that fact like proof. But here's what your mind never shows you. For every person standing in the spotlight telling you their method works, there's a graveyard of people who followed the exact same playbook and disappeared. They woke at 5 and burned out. They embraced suffering and broke. They ignored doubts and lost everything. You never hear from them because dead strategies don't sell books. Only the winners get to write the story, which tricks you into thinking their specific move was inevitable rather than lucky. A strategy that failed 99 times but worked once becomes the sage's wisdom packaged for you. The trap isn't that successful people are lying, it's that they're completely blind to their own luck. When you follow their rules and it doesn't work, shame arrives fast. You blame yourself for not wanting it badly enough, not being disciplined enough, not brave enough. You miss the quieter truth. Their recipe worked for them in that particular moment, under those exact conditions in that specific world. Whether it works for you depends on 1,000 variables they can't see and can't control. The real move isn't to ignore successful people's advice. It's to ask the harder question every single time: who didn't make it doing the opposite? What does the pile of failures actually look like? Separate the universal human truths from the contingent accidents of timing and circumstance. That distinction stops you from chasing a ghost story someone else already wrote and calling it your own future. Silent evidence of failures. You walk past a restaurant that closed last month and never think about it again. You hear someone mention a startup that went belly up and move on. But here's what your brain is doing in that glance. It's erasing the lesson. Every business that died, every person who tried something and quit, every product that vanished from shelves, they're all screaming data that you're trained to ignore. We celebrate winners and forget the graveyards. This is called survivorship bias, and it's rewriting your entire mental map of what works. When you only see the people who made it, you start believing their path was obvious, their odds were better than they actually were, their talent mattered more than luck. You don't see the 10,000 people who did exactly what they did and failed anyway. What's dangerous is that this silence compounds. You become obsessed with the habits of successful people because you can see them, interview them, follow them. Meanwhile, the failed experiments, the wrong bets, the timing that was off by 1 year, they're invisible. So you optimize for a phantom version of success. You chase the formula instead of understanding the chaos. The mental rule is this: start collecting the silent evidence. When you make a decision, force yourself to hunt for the invisible costs. Ask who tried this before and crashed. Read the lawsuits, the postmortems, the archived blogs of people who were wrong. That fog you clear, that's where actual wisdom lives. It's not shinier or louder. It just keeps you from repeating everyone else's invisible mistakes. Selection effects in your feed. Your phone has become a mirror that only shows you what you already believe. You scroll through content that matches your politics, your taste, your outrage, your aspirations, and the algorithm learns what keeps you there. This is not an accident. Every like, every pause, every share teaches the system to feed you more of the same, which means reality starts to look narrower and narrower. You think you are learning about the world. You are learning about the world according to you. This creates a trap that is almost invisible. Because you see so much evidence for your view, you become more convinced it is right, so you engage more deeply, so the algorithm narrows the feed even further. Your friends seem to agree with you. The news validates you. The experts you follow think like you do. None of this means you are wrong. It means you are looking through a straw instead of a window. The person who disagrees with you is not seeing malice or stupidity. They are seeing a completely different curated reality. When you step outside that feed, you often feel shocked. People believe things that seem absurd to you because they have been fed a different set of curated evidence for months or years. Here is the move. Start deliberately seeking sources that make you uncomfortable. Not to flip your beliefs, but to see what your feed is hiding from you. The gaps in your information are where other people are living. Knowing this gap exists puts you 10 steps ahead of people who think their feed is the whole world. Denominator blindness. You see a headline, "Shark attack spike, 47 incidents this year." Your brain lights up. Danger, avoid beaches. But wait, how many people swam in the ocean this year? Hundreds of millions. 47 out of hundreds of millions is not a spike. It's statistically invisible. Your mind grabbed the numerator, 47, and forgot to ask about the denominator, total swimmers. That forgetting is what wrecks your judgment every single day. A friend says their new business had 5 sales in week 1. Sounds promising until you learn they contacted 50 people. A study claims a supplement reduces heart disease by 30%, but it doesn't tell you the actual risk dropped from 0.8% to 0.56%. The percentage sounds massive. The real change is negligible. Here is where this bites you hardest. You make big life decisions on denominator blind numbers. You avoid a medication because you heard about rare side effects. You chase an investment because it doubled, forgetting how small the starting amount was. You judge your own productivity by wins, numerator, without counting attempts, denominator. You read that coffee increases longevity by 15% and think you've found the fountain of youth, never asking what baseline you're measuring from. The person who gets ahead is the one who stops and asks, compared to what? Out of how many? What is the full picture? Start noticing when someone gives you a number without context. That pause, that small moment of questioning, separates people who get fooled from people who see clearly. Numbers without denominators are not facts. They are fog. Sample size discipline. Your friend tries a new diet for 3 days and announces it's life-changing. Your coworker reads one article about productivity and suddenly insists everyone's doing it wrong. You watch someone have a bad experience at a restaurant and assume the whole place is ruined. All three are making the same invisible mistake. They're building conviction on rubble. One data point isn't data. 3 days isn't a trend. One bad meal doesn't tell you how a restaurant actually runs. Yet we do this constantly because our brains are lazy pattern finders that mistake frequency for evidence. A single success feels like proof. A single failure feels like a system. Sample size discipline is the habit of asking, how many times has this actually happened? How long have I actually observed this? Did I see it once or 10 times? This matters because the smaller your sample, the more likely you're seeing noise instead of signal. That one viral success story you heard, survivorship bias is probably running the show behind it. That one time someone was rude to you, maybe they were having the worst day of their year. The person who gets ahead isn't more intelligent. They're just slightly more patient about conclusions. They gather a few more data points before betting their attention or their energy. It's not flashy. It won't make you sound clever at dinner, but it will keep you from lurching between beliefs every time the wind changes direction. Next time you feel certain about something new, just pause and ask, how many times have I actually seen this happen? That single question rewires everything. Regression to the mean. You crush a presentation at work, nailed it, energy perfect, voice strong, room laughing exactly when you wanted, and naturally next week you walk in expecting to do it again. Something feels off. The energy is flatter. The jokes land softer. You spiral. Did I lose my touch? Was last week a fluke? Here's what you're missing. Last week wasn't the real you. It was you plus luck, a good night's sleep, the right coffee, an audience in a receptive mood, your voice not hoarse, the light hitting you right. This time, fewer of those things aligned. That's regression to the mean, an invisible force that runs through your entire life. Extreme performances, whether incredible or terrible, tend to be followed by something closer to your actual average. The student who bombs a test after stellar grades didn't suddenly become dumb. The athlete with an off season after a breakout year isn't finished. Weather conditions shift, motivation fluctuates, luck redistributes itself. But here's where people get it backwards. They treat the extreme as the rule and the average as failure. So they overcorrect. They panic. They change everything, blame themselves, rewrite their entire identity around one outlier moment. The smarter move is to notice when you've had an outlier, good or bad, and simply expect the pendulum to swing back toward normal. That doesn't mean you stop working. It means you stop treating randomness like prophecy. It means you hold your wins lightly and your losses lightly too. The next time you're riding high or sitting in a hole, remember, the mean is always waiting. Don't let temporary extremes rewrite your story. Signal versus noise threshold. Your phone buzzes 40 times a day. Your newsfeed refreshes with 1,000 new takes every hour. Someone just texted you a screenshot of something someone said about something else. And somewhere in that deluge, one of those notifications will actually matter. But your brain has no idea which one. That's the gap where most people drown. Signal is the information that changes your decisions. Noise is everything else pretending to be important. The trick isn't learning to ignore noise. It's setting a threshold high enough that only real signal makes it through. A text from your boss about a deadline, signal. A stranger's angry tweet that appears in your feed, noise. A medical result you've been waiting for, signal. A celebrity scandal you stumbled across, noise. Here's where people lose the game. They set their threshold too low. Every ping feels urgent. Every opinion feels worth considering. Every new piece of news feels like something you should know about right now. Your attention becomes a commons. Anyone can dump their garbage there for free, and you'll sort through it like it matters. The people who stay ahead don't fight harder. They fight smarter by asking a single question before anything gets their energy. Does this change what I do today, this week, or in the next meaningful decision I'm making? If the answer is no, it dies at the gate. Not because they're uncurious, because they understand that curiosity without a filter is just distraction dressed up as engagement. Your threshold is your bouncer. Train it ruthlessly and watch what actually belongs to you rise to the surface. Map is not the territory. You walk into a room where your partner is quiet and your chest tightens, they must be mad, but they're just tired. You see a rejection that never happened. Your brain drew it on the map before checking the actual ground. The map is the story you tell about reality. The territory is what's actually there. Most people live entirely inside the map and call it the world. Here's where it gets sharp. Your map feels more real than the territory because emotion lives there. That text felt cold, so it was cold, regardless of intention. That look felt judging, so it was judging. In your nervous system at least. You're not wrong about what you felt. You're just treating the feeling as evidence of fact, and everyone around you does this too. Your boss seems distant, so they don't value you, except they're just stressed about earnings. Your friend didn't text back, so they've moved on, except they're drowning in work. Your teenager rolled their eyes, so they hate you, except they just woke up. When you stop confusing the map with the territory, something shifts. You become harder to gaslight because you start checking. You become less reactive because you hold your story more loosely. The next time you feel certain about what someone meant or why they did something, pause and ask, am I reading the territory or am I reading my map? That single question is worth thousands of dollars in therapy and years of regret avoided. Stay curious before you stay certain and watch how differently people respond to you. Falsifiability test. Someone near you right now is telling you something that cannot be disproven, and that moment is exactly when you need to slow down and pay attention. Maybe it's a self-help guru swearing their method works for everyone, or a friend insisting their ex was purely evil, or your own brain whispering that you're the only one who understands what's really going on. The second something becomes unfalsifiable, meaning there is literally no way to prove it wrong, it stops being knowledge and starts being armor. A falsifiability test cuts through the fog. If there is nothing in the world that could prove the claim false, the claim is protecting something, not revealing something. Real ideas have edges. Real ideas can snap. A doctor says the medicine works in 70% of cases. That's falsifiable because they've left room for it to fail. A coach says your potential is limitless. That's not. And that's where the thinking stops. The trap is that falsifiability feels like doubt, and most of us were trained to treat doubt like weakness. But doubt is your quality control system running. When you catch yourself saying or believing something that could never be wrong, pause hard. Ask yourself, what would it actually look like if I were mistaken about this? If you genuinely cannot picture it, you are no longer thinking. You are defending. The people 10 steps ahead don't fall for this. They hold their own beliefs up to harsh light first, before anyone else does, asking the hard questions that most people avoid, protecting their thinking instead of protecting their ego. Steel man before rebuttal. Most people start building a case against you the moment they disagree. Half their rebuttal is already loaded before you finish a sentence. You've caught yourself doing it, that itch to dismantle instead of digest. But there's a move that completely inverts how people listen to you, and it's rare enough that doing it once will mark you as genuinely different. Before you argue back, rebuild their argument in its strongest possible form. Not the strawman version you can knock down in 3 seconds, but the version they actually meant, polished and charitable. This is steel manning, and when you do it right, something visible shifts in the room. You say something like, "So what you're really saying is," and then articulate their position better than they did themselves. They stop bracing for attack, their shoulders drop. Suddenly they're curious what you think, because you've already proven you understood them. It works in arguments with your partner, in high-stakes emails, in meetings where tension lives just beneath the surface. Your boss becomes less defensive. A colleague stops retreating. Even a stranger might actually read your response instead of swiping past it. The real game underneath is reputation. People watch who listens to understand versus who listens to win. Steel manning signals you're strong enough to engage with someone's actual thoughts, not just their weakest version. It's proof you don't need to punch down to win. You can afford to be fair, which somehow makes you more persuasive, not less. Test it this week with someone you actually disagree with and notice how the whole conversation tilts. Belief updating in increments. You've probably noticed how hard it is to change your mind all at once. Someone presents evidence, contradicts something you've held tight, and your brain doesn't shift, it digs. That's because beliefs aren't light switches. They're thick rope woven from emotion, identity, and 1,000 small moments of reinforcement. Trying to flip the whole thing at once triggers defense instead of discovery. But here's what separates people who stay sharp from people who get stuck. They update in whispers, not roars, a tiny crack in the old story. One fact that doesn't quite fit, a conversation that plants a seed and then stops. The person keeps living, keeps observing, and 3 weeks later, something clicks because it has room to land naturally. You felt this yourself. Beliefs that you fought against suddenly made sense once you stopped fighting. The trick is learning to notice when new information is trying to land instead of bouncing it away. When someone says something that bothers you, that's often your cue that a belief is being tested. Rather than defend it immediately, try this. Sit with the discomfort for 1 day. Don't argue back. Don't research counterarguments yet. Just let it exist alongside what you already think. Most of the time, your old belief holds. Sometimes it quietly transforms. Either way, you're building a mind that updates rather than calcifies. And that flexibility, that willingness to let truth be a slow reveal instead of a sudden demolition, is what keeps you ahead when the world changes faster than your certainties can catch up. Strong opinions weakly held. Watch someone claim they're open-minded, then feel their whole frame stiffen the moment you push back. They've confused open-mindedness with spinelessness, so now they're defending whatever half-formed belief they stumbled into like it's bedrock truth. The real leverage lies in the opposite move. Walk in with an opinion you've actually built, one that reflects your best thinking right now, and keep your hand on the eject button the moment better evidence shows up. Sounds like common sense, except most people lock a belief into place early, wrap their identity around it, and spend the next 5 years defending it like a fortress under siege. You've watched it happen. The person just asking questions who already knows the answer before you speak. The analyst cherry-picking data while ignoring every study that contradicts their gut. Strong opinions weakly held means you're not apologizing for taking up space with a point of view. You come loaded, you speak clearly, you're not halfway about it. But you're also not emotionally fused to being right. When someone brings logic or evidence you hadn't factored in, it doesn't feel like a wound to your identity. It feels like the thinking got better. This is what makes you strange in a room. You can't be slotted. Not the pushover, not the ideologue, not the argument picker who will die on every hill. You think, and thinking moves. The people 3 steps ahead aren't gripping certainty white-knuckled. They're steady enough to hold firm ground while staying genuinely curious about whether that ground will actually hold. Confidence calibration training. Watch 2 people walk into the same room. One feels certain they'll nail the pitch and walks out shocked at how badly it went. The other doubts themselves, speaks anyway, and lands the deal. The distance between what they believed about themselves and what actually happened, that gap is where most people stay blind. Confidence calibration training is just the disciplined habit of checking your gut against your results every single time. After a meeting, after a decision, after you've pushed back on something, you pause and ask, how sure was I coming in and what actually happened? No ego, no excuses, just the honest score. Over a few weeks, patterns start appearing. Maybe you crush it when you're nervous, but fold when you're cocky. Maybe your worst moments happen when you're faking certainty you don't actually feel. Maybe you're too timid when you should be bold. The real power here is building a personal feedback loop that almost nobody bothers creating, a living map of which version of your confidence is real and which is borrowed noise. This is how people move from lucky once to consistently sharp. The trick is staying curious instead of defensive when reality shows up different than your prediction. Start small. Before something that matters, write down your confidence level 1 to 10. Then, after it's done, write what actually happened. Do this 10 times. The clarity hits fast. Your next big decision won't be built on fantasy about yourself. It'll be built on actual evidence. That's the 10-step difference right there. Forecast with error bars. You're standing in a meeting predicting when a project ships. Most people do this. Will be done in 6 weeks. That's a point estimate, and it's almost certainly wrong the moment you speak it. The smarter move is to think like someone who actually has to live with consequences. Add a range. Will be done in 6 weeks, but realistically, somewhere between 5 and 9 weeks, depending on what we discover. That's an error bar, and it shifts everything about how people plan. When you give a single number, you're pretending certainty you don't own. You're also anchoring everyone's brain on false precision. So when reality wobbles, and it will, they feel betrayed rather than informed. When you give a range, you're not being less confident. You're admitting the actual shape of your knowledge. You're being honest in a way that builds trust faster than any reassurance could. People listen to someone who says, here's what I expect, here's my margin of error, far more than someone who claims exact numbers. This works everywhere. Prediction matters. Salary negotiation, how long it takes to learn something, the size of a market you're entering, timelines you're committing to. Anywhere you're making a bet on the future, add the invisible space around it. Better estimates don't come from false precision. They come from naming your uncertainty first. The ones who get ahead aren't the ones with the shiniest numbers. They're the ones who factor in what they don't know and say it out loud, turning doubt into the thing people trust most. Premortem before commitment. Before you say yes to something big, a job, a project, a relationship move, a financial bet, try something that sounds morbid but isn't. Sit down and imagine it's 6 months from now and the thing failed completely. Not might fail, did fail. Walk backward from that disaster. What went wrong? Was it your fault or circumstance? Did you run out of energy? Did someone else flake? Did the goal itself shift and you didn't notice? Did you find out too late that you actually hated the thing you committed to? Most people skip this step because it feels negative, like they're jinxing themselves. Actually, you're just borrowing wisdom from future you who would have spotted the landmine before stepping on it. You're giving present you a chance to ask harder questions before the clock starts ticking. The weird thing is that this mental exercise often surfaces real constraints or blind spots you didn't even know were there. Maybe you're saying yes because you hate saying no, not because you actually want it. Maybe you'll need support you don't have lined up yet. Maybe you're running on fumes already, and adding anything now is setting yourself up for collapse. The sharpest people do this routinely, not to kill the idea, but to go in with eyes wide open, contingency plans loaded, and an honest read on whether you're built for this specific thing right now. That hard thinking isn't pessimism. It's the difference between a commitment you can actually keep and a promise you'll watch yourself break. Outside view estimation. When you are planning something, a project, a relationship, a career move, your mind zooms in on your specific situation like you are the only case study that matters. Your circumstances feel unique. Your obstacles feel custom built for you. Your timeline feels like nobody else has ever tried this exact thing. That laser focus is the inside view, and it is also where most estimates fall apart. The outside view is the corrective. What actually happened the last 1,000 times someone tried this? A friend launching a startup thinks their idea is special, their team is special, their timing is right. The outside view says 9 out of 10 startups fail in 5 years, regardless of how the founders felt, not because their belief was wrong, but because belief does not predict outcomes. When you ask, how long will this take? Your gut says 6 weeks. The outside view asks, how long did it take the last 50 people who did this? Add 30%. When you ask, will this work? Your specific facts say yes. The outside view asks, what is the base rate for this type of thing succeeding? Does my situation actually beat it, or does it just feel like it? Here is what separates the sharp planners from the hopeful ones. They do not ignore their situation. They need the inside view's detail for texture and nuance. But they anchor first on what the numbers say about similar cases, then adjust up or down based on what they actually know that makes them different. Start there, then trust your gut less and the data more. Planning fallacy correction. You say the project takes 2 weeks. It takes 4. You budgeted 3 hours for the errand. It eats 6. You promised yourself you'd be ready by Friday. Monday arrives, and you're still scrambling. This isn't laziness or bad math. It's your brain's refusal to believe that things take as long as they actually do, and that refusal costs you time, stress, and credibility. The planning fallacy is what happens when you estimate based on your best case scenario while ignoring every delay, interruption, and complication that always show up. Your past projects overran. Your past errands took longer, yet you still plan as if you live in a world without traffic, without emails, without the random Tuesday meeting that derails everything. The trick is to stop trusting your gut timeline entirely. Instead, look at what similar tasks have actually cost you before, not what you think they should cost. If your last 3 presentations took 5 hours to prepare, the next one takes 5 hours, not 3. If you historically underestimate by 40%, multiply your number by 1.4 before you commit to a deadline. This sounds mechanical, but it works because it bypasses the optimism that keeps blindsiding you. When you anchor to real data instead of hope, you suddenly have breathing room. You finish early instead of late. You look reliable. And maybe more important, you stop living in that constant state of rushing, apologizing, and disappointing people who believed your estimate. That's not a small win. That's reclaiming your reputation and your peace of mind in one move. Parkinson's law of deadlines. You give yourself 2 weeks to finish a project, and somehow it takes exactly 2 weeks. You give yourself 3 days, and it's done in 3 days. Same quality, same effort, just compressed. Your brain is not lazy. It's a pressure-responsive machine. The work expands to fill the time you allot it, not because you're procrastinating, but because your mind genuinely recalibrates what done means based on the boundary you've drawn. This is Parkinson's law in action, and most people accidentally use it against themselves. A vague deadline of sometime next month becomes a black hole where everything softens and stretches. A hard deadline of Friday at noon becomes a forcing function that cuts through distraction like a knife. The real leverage is that you get to choose the container. You're not a victim of time. You're the architect of how your brain distributes its effort. So when someone says, take as long as you need, they're accidentally giving you permission to meander. When someone says, I need it by Tuesday, your brain suddenly knows what efficient looks like. The next time you're facing something that feels endless, try shrinking the deadline instead of stretching it. Not into something impossible, but into something tighter than feels comfortable. Give yourself half the time you think you need. Watch what your brain does when it knows the stakes are real. The work doesn't get worse, it gets sharper, tighter, more focused. Most people never test this, so they never discover they had way more capacity hiding behind artificial slack the whole time. Your deadline is not a prison, it's the lever. Chesterton's fence rule. There's a fence in the middle of the road nobody can remember building. Someone says, tear it down. Waste of space, ugliness, pointless obstruction. And if you're fast and confident, you might swing the axe before asking why it's there. Chesterton's fence rule is the pause before you break something. It says, don't remove, change, or dismiss anything until you fully understand why someone put it there in the first place. Not just the stated reason, but the actual problem it solves, the pain it was born from. This matters because the world is thicker than it looks. Your company has policies that seem dumb until you learn they cost someone 3 lawsuits to write. Your family has rules that feel arbitrary until you realize they're fences around old wounds. Your own habits look wasteful until you trace them back to a very real need they met once, maybe still do. The trap is confidence mixed with impatience. We tear down what looks unnecessary, then act shocked when chaos follows, not because the fence was perfect, but because we didn't understand what it was holding back. The smarter move isn't to keep everything unchanged. It's to ask before you break. Find out who built it, what they were protecting against, what's different now. Sometimes the fence comes down. Sometimes you add a gate. Sometimes you realize it was never the fence at all. It was your impatience with not knowing. That habit of asking first, moving second, quietly puts you ahead of everyone else swinging at problems they don't actually see. Lindy effect for durability. Walk into a used bookstore and notice what's been marked down versus what's still priced high. The paperbacks from 3 months ago live in the clearance bin. The Stoic essays from 200 years ago still command shelf space. There's a logic hiding in that gap, and it's sharper than most people realize. The longer something has already survived without being abandoned, the longer it's likely to survive into the future, not because it's perfect, but because it's already proven it doesn't need to be. This is the Lindy effect, and start spotting it everywhere once you know the pattern exists. Apply it to people. Someone with 20 years in their field likely has another 20 ahead because they've already filtered out every foolish shortcut and fad that would have killed their momentum. Apply it to advice. The parenting wisdom your grandmother swore by still works because it's been tested across generations, not because a TED Talk last week said so. The reverse cuts deeper. That shiny productivity system promising everything, it's 3 months old. That diet everyone's excited about, 2 years max before it evaporates. You don't need cynicism, just strategy. When choosing what to learn, who to follow, which tools to build your life around, ask how long it's already lasted. The older the idea, the more time it has ahead. Time isn't just a quality filter, it's a durability prediction machine that works whether you trust it or not. Your future self will thank you for picking the things already built to last. Via Negativa improvement. Most people think getting ahead means adding more skills, more habits, more discipline, more grind. But there's a stranger path that often works faster, subtracting the things that are actively making you worse. Via Negativa is just that, the art of knowing what to remove instead of what to add. It's the antidote to the modern cult of optimization, which assumes your life is a blank canvas waiting to be painted. It isn't. Your life is already crowded, you're already full. The question isn't what should go in, it's what's in the way. Think about your actual day. You're probably not failing because you lack morning routines or accountability partners. You're struggling because you're sleeping poorly, scrolling before bed, eating foods that fog your brain, or spending time with people who drain you. Remove the sleep thief, cut the energy vampire from your calendar, stop the bad diet. You don't need a new app or a new goal. You need fewer holes in your boat. A single decision to stop something often compounds more than 100 decisions to start something. When you quit a habit that was costing you 4 hours a week, you don't gain 4 hours. You gain clarity, momentum, and the mental space to actually think. You get your mind back. That's where real leverage lives. Not in the shiny addition, but in the quiet subtraction. Try it this week. Identify one thing that's actively working against you and remove it completely. Don't replace it with anything. Just notice the space it leaves behind and how much lighter you feel. Constraint reveals design. You've probably noticed that your best ideas don't arrive in wide open space. They arrive when the walls move in. Shrink your budget and suddenly you stop buying what you thought you needed and see what actually matters. Give yourself 2 hours instead of all day and the noise burns away. A writer with a 280 character limit doesn't complain about the limit. She invents Twitter's entire voice inside it. A photographer who can only shoot in low light learns to see the frame differently than someone drowning in studio lights. A startup that can't afford traditional marketing discovers they have a product worth talking about because people have to actually like the thing. When resources tighten, you see the real skeleton underneath, the bone structure nobody hides under fat. Most people treat constraints like enemies, like proof they're blocked, but they're actually teachers wearing a rough disguise. They force you to choose. They kill the decorative thinking, the bloat, the options that were never going to matter anyway. Every decision gets harder to waste because you genuinely can't afford it. And here's what sneaks up on you. When you remove the constraint later, you don't slide back into the old loose way. You keep the clarity. You've learned what the thing actually needs to breathe. So the next time you're squeezed, time, money, attention, don't just resist it. Ask what it's showing you. What would this be if it only had half the resources? What would matter then? That single question is often worth more than the constraint itself. Bottleneck thinking. You know that feeling when a project stalls and you blame the one thing holding it up. The slow approval, the missing hire, the stuck decision. So you push hard on that one thing. Everyone does, and almost everyone misses what's actually happening. The bottleneck is rarely where you think it is, and attacking the obvious blockage usually just moves the problem sideways. Here's the trap. Systems don't fail at the weakest point. They fail at the slowest, conscious point, the one you can see and feel. The real constraint is often hiding 3 steps behind, invisible because nobody's looking there. A project delays because an approval is slow, so you bug the approver. But the approver delays because they're waiting for clarity on requirements. The requirements are vague because nobody defined the real user problem. You fixed the wrong thing twice. Better move. Stop assuming the pain point is the problem point. When something feels stuck, ask what that stuck thing is actually waiting for. Then ask what that is waiting for. Most bottlenecks dissolve the moment you trace back 2 or 3 layers and fix the invisible constraint. The real insight is knowing that bottlenecks shift constantly. You unblock one, and suddenly a different piece becomes the slowest. The people who think ahead build systems and teams where they can spot the next bottleneck coming. They already have the next move queued up before the current one breaks. That's how they stay 10 steps ahead, not by moving faster, but by knowing which direction to look first. Comparative advantage over effort. You know that friend who is terrible at cooking but incredible at making people laugh, so they bring the jokes to dinner parties instead of the entree? That is comparative advantage, and most people never learn it because ambition looks like fixing your weaknesses instead. We grow up hearing that you should be well-rounded, so you spend 3 months learning to cook when you could be spending those 3 months getting better at the one thing only you can do. The math is brutal. If you make $50 an hour doing your actual strength and you could hire someone to cook for $5 an hour, you lose $45 of value per hour by cooking yourself. But psychologically, this feels wrong, like cheating or admitting defeat. So you grind on the weakness, feel exhausted, and stay stuck. The real win is not being good at everything. It is being honest about where you have an unfair edge and then doubling down there instead of spreading yourself thin, trying to be competent everywhere. Your time is not infinite, and every hour spent leveling up a medium skill is an hour not spent becoming world-class at your one peculiar strength. The gap widens quietly. While someone else is still trying to be decent at 6 things, you are becoming untouchable at 1. The person 10 steps ahead is not the one who fixed all their problems. They are the one who got weirdly, almost irrationally good at the one thing nobody else quite wanted to master. That focus compounds faster than effort ever will. Circle of competence boundary. Warren Buffett keeps a rule so simple it's almost invisible. Stay inside the circle where you actually know what you're talking about. Outside it, you're not wrong. You're just guessing and calling it skill. Watch what happens in real life. A guy makes a fortune in real estate, and suddenly his take on politics sounds true. A surgeon knows anatomy, so their diet advice feels authoritative. A podcaster finds an audience and becomes an expert on everything from parenting to finance. None of it sticks because confidence doesn't transfer like a download. Real confidence is boring. It's the willingness to say, that's outside my territory without flinching, without needing to fill the silence. Inside your circle, the stuff you've actually studied, failed at, rebuilt, bled for, Your instincts are sharp because they're rooted in pattern recognition that took time, real hours, real cost when you're wrong. Outside it, instincts are just noise dressed up as authority. The trap is that your brain doesn't feel different when you've crossed the line. Overconfidence looks identical to earned confidence from the inside, which is why so many intelligent people become confidently wrong. So the rule is mechanical. Before you act or advise on something, ask yourself whether you have real skin in the game. If not, you're gambling with someone else's chips. The people who compound wealth, trust, and influence aren't smarter than everyone else. They're honest about the shape of what they don't know. They stay focused on deepening one or two circles instead of pretending every door belongs to them. That discipline is what separates the compounding winners from the perpetually lucky. Preference falsification. Walk into a meeting where everyone seems to agree on something you quietly doubt. You nod along. You don't want to be the difficult one, but here's what you don't see. 3 other people in that room are doing exactly the same thing, each convinced they're the only skeptic. That silence isn't consensus. It's a room full of people hiding their actual preferences to fit in. Preference falsification is the gap between what you really think and what you perform thinking, and it spreads like a quiet plague through families, offices, and entire cultures. The trap is that it compounds. When enough people hide their true view, the fake consensus becomes so visible and convincing that people actually start to believe it themselves. You stop pretending and start forgetting you were pretending. Suddenly, the thing nobody actually wanted becomes the thing everyone has to do. What makes this dangerous is how invisible it is. You feel like you're just being reasonable, going along, not making waves. But those small surrenders add up. Teams make terrible decisions. Communities lose their actual voice. Relationships stay stuck on surface-level politeness instead of real talk. The move ahead is brutal in its simplicity. Occasionally, be the first one to say the quiet thing out loud, not to be contrarian, but to break the falsification chain. You'll be shocked how many people exhale with relief when someone finally names what they were actually thinking. That exhale is where real agreement and real intelligence actually lives. The cost of silence is always steeper than the cost of one honest moment. Common knowledge cascades. You walk into a room where everyone is looking at their phones. No one said, "Look at your phone," but you feel the pull anyway. That's a cascade, and it happens faster than actual thought. It starts when a few people do something. Maybe they're bored, maybe they're checking the time, and then others see them doing it and assume there's a good reason. You don't need the reason yourself. The fact that they're doing it becomes the reason. Before long, everyone's phone is out, and nobody remembers who started it. The real trap isn't that you followed along, it's that you probably felt like you decided to. A belief spreads through your office that remote work kills productivity. Nobody's really tested it. Someone important said it once, others nodded, and now it feels like fact. You can feel the weight of everyone knows this, so you stop pushing back. But people who stay 10 steps ahead notice something different. They ask the person nodding next to them, "Actually, what's your real experience? And who first said that?" They crack the cascade by going local, talking to one actual human being instead of surrendering to the ghost of common knowledge. The voice of the crowd only sounds real until you realize you've never actually met most of the people in it. Next time you catch yourself thinking something because everyone knows, stop and ask, have you met these people? Or are you just feeling the cascade move through you? That single question changes everything about how you think, and it's the gap where smart people find room to breathe. Overton window drift. Pull up a political debate from 30 years ago, and you'll notice something strange. People are horrified by things that feel almost quaint now and openly supporting ideas that would spark outrage today, not because they were stupid. The window of what we all find acceptable, reasonable, or even thinkable has drifted without fanfare, and you've drifted with it without ever voting on the move. Here's where it gets dangerous. Most people treat the window like a fixed wall, some eternal truth about morality or sense. Really, it's just the narrow band of ideas your peer group, your media diet, and your daily conversations happen to orbit right now. A belief that seemed fringe 5 years ago becomes mainstream. Something mainstream becomes unspeakable. The shift happens in inches, so you never catch it happening. The real trap is that you can't see the window from inside it. You can only see the ideas floating around. So when someone outside your current window says something, your brain doesn't think, oh, that's beyond the acceptable range right now. It thinks that person is broken or that's morally repugnant. You're not evaluating the idea, you're checking whether it fits the invisible box you're already standing in. This is why genuine disagreement feels impossible. You're not actually disagreeing about the idea itself, you're disagreeing about which window is real. The rare move is catching yourself when you dismiss something fast and asking whether you're rejecting the idea or just rejecting that it lives in a different window. That single pause lets you see the box instead of just being trapped inside it. Availability cascade. You spot a gray sedan on the highway, sleek, modern, the kind you'd never noticed before, and suddenly they're everywhere. 3 on your commute home, 2 in the grocery lot. Your brain hasn't woken up to a new trend. It woke up to that car. And now the evidence feels inescapable. This is availability cascade, and it runs deeper than automotive spotting. A friend mentions their divorce, and you start seeing cracks in your own relationship you hadn't noticed yesterday. One plane crash story hits the news, and flying suddenly feels statistically riskier, even though nothing about the actual numbers shifted. A single cutting remark from your boss plays on loop while 5 compliments dissolve into static. Your mind conflates recently in my thoughts with actually frequent in the world, and that confusion snowballs outward into decisions. You avoid the flight, you pick fights defending your marriage, you search for more evidence to prop up the cascade you've already started, and it feeds itself, growing teeth. The real danger isn't the initial misfiring, it's that you begin acting as if the cascade were fact, which makes it feel more true in hindsight. The antidote is small but sharp. When something feels suddenly urgent or like proof of a pattern, hit pause and ask yourself the unglamorous question, is this actually common or just vivid in my mind right now? Check the baseline when nothing special is happening, when the spotlight isn't glaring. Most of the time, you'll find the world hasn't shifted at all. Only the spotlight in your head has moved, and that matters more than you think. Information cascade in crowds. You walk into a coffee shop and see 10 people staring at their phones instead of the menu, so you pull yours out too. Not because you actually needed it, you know what you want, but because the crowd made it feel like the right move. That moment is an information cascade, and it's running your life more than you think. Here's the mechanism. When someone sees others doing something, they assume those people know something they don't, so they copy. Then the next person sees 2 people doing it and thinks even harder, it must be right. By person 5 or 6, nobody's checking facts anymore. They're just following the visible pattern. The wrinkle is that the first person might have been totally wrong. They just like the aesthetic, but the cascade doesn't care. It rolls forward anyway, and suddenly everyone's convinced something's true because everyone's doing it. Nobody actually verified it. This happens in markets, in politics, in what you eat, in what you're afraid of. A rumor spreads. One restaurant empties while another gets a line around the block for no reason anyone can actually articulate. You see people worried about something, so you become worried, and now you're helping spread the worry to someone else standing behind you in line. The sharp move is simpler than you'd think. Before you follow what the crowd's doing, pause and ask yourself what you actually know versus what you're assuming they know. That one honest question can break the cascade before it carries you somewhere you didn't intend to go. Pluralistic ignorance. You're in a meeting. Someone pitches an idea that makes no sense to you, but nobody speaks up. Everyone nods, so you nod too, and silently assume everyone else gets it, that you're the one missing something. Turns out, in the parking lot later, 3 people admit they had no idea what was happening either. Everyone was performing certainty while feeling confused. That's pluralistic ignorance, and it runs your life more than you realize. It happens because we use other people as mirrors to check if we should feel weird or worried. If they look calm, we borrow their calm. If they act like something is normal, we accept the lie. But here's the trap. Everyone else is doing the exact same thing, reading everyone else, creating a hall of mirrors where nobody is actually checking reality. The group ends up confident about something nobody actually believes. This is how bad ideas survive in offices, how silence protects abuse, how crowds panic together. The thing that saves you is almost stupidly simple, but demands real courage. Be the first person to ask the dumb question, admit confusion, or name the thing nobody is saying out loud. When you do, you break the mirror. Suddenly, others feel permission to be honest too. You are not behind. You are not weird for noticing the emperor is naked. You're just ahead of everyone else who is still performing confidence while drowning in private doubt. That gap between what people actually think and what they pretend everyone else thinks is where opportunity lives, where real leadership starts, where trust gets built. Diffusion of responsibility. You're in a meeting and someone just dropped a huge problem on the table. 5 people in the room. You think someone else will step up, right? So you stay quiet. They're thinking the same thing. 20 minutes later, nothing's happened, and everyone leaves frustrated. That's diffusion of responsibility. When a group exists, individual accountability vanishes like fog. The more eyes in the room, the less pressure on your shoulders. The psychology is brutal and automatic. Shared responsibility feels like no responsibility at all. You've probably been on both sides of this without naming it. Maybe you didn't help a stranger because other people were there. Maybe you stayed silent in a group chat when you should have spoken up. Your brain does the math fast. If there are 10 of us, I'm only 1/10 responsible, which means I'm only 1/10 guilty too. The larger the group, the easier the escape hatch becomes. But watch what actually happens in the world. The people who move forward know this trap cold. They act like they're alone even when they're not. They name the responsibility instead of hiding in it. In a group text, they volunteer first. In a meeting, they're the one who says, "I'll handle this," not because they're martyrs, but because they understand the mechanics. The person who breaks the diffusion pattern becomes the person who gets things done. Everyone else defaults to waiting. You don't have to be brilliant or specially gifted. You just have to be the one who refuses to split the bill on accountability. That small refusal compounds faster than almost anything else. Social proof under uncertainty. You walk into a restaurant on an empty Tuesday night and see two tables occupied. You pick one. 5 minutes later, someone else walks in and sits at the same table you chose. Not because the food is better there, but because now it looks chosen. That's social proof under uncertainty doing its invisible work. When you don't know what to do, your brain shortcuts to what are other people doing and treats their presence as evidence of correctness. It feels like you're thinking, you're actually following. The trap deepens because uncertainty makes you hungry for any signal. A crowded Yelp page, a Netflix show everyone's talking about, a job title that sounds impressive. You don't need to verify it yourself anymore. The herd already did. But here's what most people miss. This bias floods worst in moments where stakes feel high and information feels scarce. You're choosing a therapist, buying a health supplement, or deciding which news source to trust. Suddenly, that crowd looks like wisdom. In reality, crowds can be wrong together. They can be bots. They can be people who also didn't know and just followed someone else. The gap between many people chose this and this is actually good for you can be the size of a canyon. So before you let the crowd decide, ask yourself one hard question. Am I following because I've checked the facts or because I'm uncomfortable being alone in my choice? That single pause, that tiny moment of friction between the herd pull and your own judgment puts you 10 steps ahead. Authority gradient suppression. You're in a meeting. Your boss says something slightly off, maybe a number that doesn't add up, maybe a strategy that misses something obvious. You feel the temperature drop inside your body. That small physics of knowing but not saying. Your brain runs a quick calculation. Speaking up might make you look difficult or worse, make them look bad, so you stay quiet. That silence is the authority gradient at work, and it costs you every single time. Authority gradient suppression is about building enough internal permission to speak up, disagree, or point out what you actually see, regardless of someone's rank. It's not rudeness. It's not insubordination. It's the opposite of the freeze up that keeps good ideas trapped inside scared people. The teams that win are the ones where a junior analyst can say, I think we're missing something without needing to rehearse it 5 times first. Where a designer can tell the CEO that the direction feels safe, not bold. Where someone actually names the elephant instead of working around it for 6 months. Most people confuse respect with silence. They think hierarchy means you earn the right to speak later once you've paid your dues. But the real cost, the invisible cost, is paid by organizations that lose better answers because people learned early that their voice has a tax. You don't have to be combative. You just have to practice being useful out loud. Start small. 1 meeting this week, 1 true thing you actually think. The person across the table will either appreciate the clarity or prove they weren't worth the silence anyway. Signaling versus substance. Walk into any room and watch your brain light up at the watch, the shoes, the exact vocabulary. Trust floods in before a real word gets spoken. That's signal at work. A shortcut so fast and so convincing, most people never dig deeper. Signaling is costume, the degree on the wall, the confidence in the voice, the humble brag about Tulum, the LinkedIn post about unexpected opportunities. Substance is what happens when nobody's watching, when stakes are messy and outcomes uncertain. Here's where it gets dangerous. Signaling works so well that we start treating it as fact. A slick pitch with no follow-through becomes a sale. An impressive title becomes actual leverage. A carefully curated feed becomes the person you think you know. But the person 10 steps ahead doesn't confuse the performer for the performance. They notice the watch, absolutely, but they're listening for the gap between what someone claims and what they've actually built. They ask the question everyone else skips. What did this person do when it was hard and nobody was looking? That's where substance lives, in the unglamorous move you make because it matters, not because it photographs well. Substance is the work you keep doing after the applause stops. The 10-step edge isn't skepticism, it's precision. You're not dismissing impressive people. You're just refusing to mistake their image for their engine. Here's the move. Next time you meet someone magnetic, pause before your trust lands. Notice the signal. Hunt for the proof. That gap between image and reality is where everyone else gets played and where you get smarter. Costly signal credibility. When someone tells you they love their job, you nod politely. When they quit that same job to start a risky business in the field, suddenly you believe them. Nothing about their words changed, but the cost attached to the claim did. That cost is what makes people actually trust you. A costly signal is anything you do that hurts if you're lying, but costs you nothing if you're telling the truth. It's skin in the game. You see this everywhere once you start looking. The investor who puts their own money into their fund, the chef who eats their own cooking, the author who uses their real name instead of hiding behind a pen name. These people are credible not because they sound sincere, but because lying would demolish them. Your brain knows this. When someone takes a real hit for what they're saying, money, time, reputation, comfort, you unconsciously register that as true. And here's where it gets useful. If you want people to believe what you're telling them, look for small ways to put actual cost on your claim. Admit a weakness alongside your strength. Take a stand that costs you something, not just something that sounds noble. Offer a refund guarantee you actually mean. The people who skip this step keep wondering why nobody trusts them even though they sound so convincing. They sound convincing because they have nothing to lose. You can be different. Find one claim you're making this week and ask what would break if you were wrong. Then do it anyway. That's what credibility actually is. Foot in the door escalation. You agree to a 5-minute favor, then 3 weeks later, the person is asking for your weekend. The first yes was so small it didn't feel dangerous. That's the whole design. Foot in the door escalation is the quiet art of making someone comfortable with small commitments, then slowly cranking up what you ask of them. By the time the stakes are real, saying no feels like betrayal instead of boundary. The person has already told themselves a story. I'm someone who helps this person. I'm loyal. And that identity makes the third or fourth ask feel automatic. You've seen this in workplaces when a coworker asks to borrow your laptop once, then borrows it twice a week, then starts assuming it's half theirs. You've felt it in relationships when favors accumulate into a lopsided rhythm nobody explicitly agreed to. The mechanism works because humans are consistency machines. Once we've shown up a certain way, we keep showing up that way to feel coherent with ourselves. The escalation happens so gradually that your nervous system never triggers a warning. It's not a sudden grab, it's a slow tilt. The defense is simple and counterintuitive. Notice when you're giving the first yes. That initial agreement is the hinge. If someone's ask grows without discussion or mutual consent, if small shifts are happening quietly, that's the tell. You don't need to become selfish or cold. Just be willing to reset the terms before the pattern hardens into an identity you didn't choose. The people worth keeping will respect the honesty. The ones who won't, that's information worth having early. Door in the face contrast. Your boss drops the ask, redesign the entire client database, launch in 2 weeks, work weekends, no extra budget. You're already forming the word no. Then she leans back. Or, if that's too much, could you just audit the system and send me a report by Friday? Suddenly, Friday feels like breathing room. You say yes. What just happened is your brain measuring requests against anchors instead of against your actual capacity or desire. The first ask, the absurd one, became your reference point, and everything after shrank in its shadow. This is door-in-the-face contrast, and it works because humans don't measure offers against reality. They measure them against whatever number came before. Salespeople live in this territory. The car dealer walks you past the loaded luxury model, 6 figures, every bell attached, then over to the mid-range sedan. Suddenly it feels modest, practical, almost frugal, even though it's still $30,000. Your judgment didn't shift, your scale did. The real trap is that you won't feel it happening. You'll walk out believing you made a rational choice when you actually just compared the offer to an artificially inflated anchor instead of to your actual needs, your actual paycheck, your actual life. Before you say yes to anything, pause and ask yourself what you'd want if the big ask had never been made at all. Ignore the contrast. Strip away the reference point and listen to what your actual capacity says. That single move stops the anchor from hijacking your decision, and suddenly the reasonable option looks like the overreach it actually is. Anchoring the negotiation frame. Walk into a salary conversation and the hiring manager speaks first. Just a number, casual, like it's obvious. Your brain locks onto it instantly, tethers itself there, and suddenly everything you say gets measured against that gravitational center instead of your actual position. It's not a conscious process. It feels like you're negotiating, but you're really negotiating within a cage someone else built the moment they opened their mouth. The person who plants the flag first doesn't win because they're smarter. They win because they've already reset what reasonable looks like in that room. In business, in marriage, in buying a car, in salary talks, the first number becomes the invisible boundary everyone dances within. You feel it as a range, but it's really a prison with bars you can't quite see. Here's what most people miss. If you anchor first, you don't control the other person's thinking. You control the ground they're standing on. A seller naming the asking price reshapes what fair means. A company offering a starting salary redefines your sense of your own worth. The defense is simple but takes nerve. Name your anchor before they name theirs. Not with drama or performance, just matter-of-factly, as if it's obvious and you're not nervous at all. Then stay quiet and let them react. Most people will negotiate downward from your anchor, not upward from theirs. You're no longer climbing. They are. Plant it early, hold it steady, and the entire psychological weight of the conversation shifts onto their side of the table instead of yours. Reciprocity debt engineering. Walk into most relationships and you'll see people treating favors like currency of kindness. Wrong ledger. Your brain and theirs runs a deeper math underneath, one that trades in debt and imbalance rather than warm feelings. When you deliver something of genuine value early on, something that costs you real time or expertise or access, you're not building goodwill. You're creating a gap in their psychological account. Their brain doesn't feel grateful. It feels exposed. There's an asymmetry now, and brains hate asymmetry. They register it as something owed, a quiet pressure to restore the balance. But here's what most people miss. The gift has to be specific and timely enough to solve an actual problem, not just nice. A random small favor lands as noise. A perfectly timed introduction that opens a door they've been staring at, that creates real debt. Now, the trap. You give and then wait around expecting reciprocity to happen on its own. It won't. The people who architect this understand that debt needs to breathe. Weeks or months pass. Then, much later, when you make an ask, collaboration, a connection, honest feedback, their subconscious is already primed to yes. They're not doing you a favor, they're settling an imbalance their own brain created. One caveat that matters: this only works if the initial gift is bulletproof real. Fake gestures, obligatory help, performative noise, people detect it instantly and the whole structure collapses. But genuine value, actual skin in the game, that puts you 10 steps ahead in every negotiation that follows. Commitment, consistency trap. Say yes to something out loud, a friend's favor, a new diet, a committee seat, and your brain instantly recasts it as who you are. The moment the words leave your mouth, commitment hardens into identity. Cialdini's research showed this decades ago. You'll defend that choice past logic, throw good time after bad, ignore better options, and rationalize away red flags because admitting you were wrong feels like betraying yourself. Your brain isn't wired to constantly reassess. It uses consistency as an escape hatch from the exhausting work of asking whether something still matters to you. Listen next time you're defending something you don't genuinely want anymore, and you'll hear the language, "I've always been like this," or "I said I would." That's the consistency trap speaking through your own voice. The real sting is that you'll interpret the discomfort of changing course as a character flaw, so you'll stay locked in longer. Staying means preserving the story, leaving means admitting you were wrong, and your identity won't let you do that without feeling fraudulent. Here's the move: run an audit every few months on the big commitments, not "Am I the type of person who does this?" but a colder question: if I were choosing this fresh today, would I pick it again? That small shift cuts the identity rope. You're not abandoning your values. You're just refusing to let yesterday's yes trap tomorrow's you. Evolution isn't betrayal. Freeing yourself from choices that no longer serve you is where actual character lives. Sunk cost divestment. You've been in a relationship for 7 years. It's not working. You catch yourself thinking, "But I've already invested so much time." That thought right there. That's the trap snapping shut. Your brain is using the past to anchor a future decision, and it's costing you clarity. Sunk costs are dead money, dead time, dead effort. They're gone whether you stay or leave. Yet we treat them like collateral we need to protect by throwing good years after bad ones, as if remaining miserable could somehow validate what already happened. Here's where most people get stuck. They think abandoning a sunk cost means admitting waste. It doesn't. It means you're finally willing to look at what comes next instead of what already happened. The 7 years don't disappear if you leave. They don't transform into wisdom by staying locked in place. They're just gone, and that's the only honest place to start from. The mental rule is simple. Make decisions based on future value alone, not past investment, not what you've already paid. Ask yourself what you would choose if you were starting today with no history, no guilt, no, "but I've given so much." That clarity is what separates people who build momentum from people who get stuck defending old choices. This works everywhere: bad jobs, failed projects, friendships that drain you, hobbies you hate. The moment you stop treating the past as a reason and start treating it as pure information, you get your agency back. And that's when you start noticing how people 10 steps ahead think differently about everything. Endowment effect on ideas. 3 hours in, and your business plan feels like it belongs to you. The messaging, the angle, the whole architecture of it. Someone points out a soft spot in the logic, and you feel it in your chest before you feel it in your mind. That quick sting of defensiveness isn't dumb, it's your ownership reflex firing. Your brain treats ideas you've built the same way it treats a jacket you've worn for years. The longer you've had it, the more you're convinced it fits perfectly, even if it doesn't. This is the endowment effect at work, and it's one of the quietest assassins of good thinking. What felt like creative conviction becomes creative blindness. You stop poking holes because you're already emotionally invested. You stop listening because you've already made your choice. The person who hears your idea for the first time has no stake in its survival, so they spot the weak points you've trained yourself not to see. The gap between your reading and theirs is the gap between attachment and clarity. Here's the actual move. Treat your own ideas like borrowed things, not property. When you catch yourself defending instead of exploring, pause. That's the signal. Ask yourself what a total stranger would shred first, then go find someone who will actually tell you. Pitch it, then sit with the critique without trying to fix it in real time. The ideas that survive that kind of honest friction aren't the ones you love most. They're the ones with actual legs. That's the difference between clutching something and building something real. Loss aversion asymmetry. You'd think losing $10 would feel exactly opposite to gaining $10. It doesn't. The sting of $10 vanishing hits roughly twice as hard as the pleasure of $10 landing in your pocket. This mismatch, where losses weigh heavier than equal gains, is loss aversion asymmetry, and it's quietly warping every financial decision you're making. Because losses hurt more, your brain becomes hypervigilant about downside protection. You hold on to that stock that's already lost money, hoping to break even. You stay in a job you hate because you're terrified of what leaving might cost. You avoid the conversation about the relationship because the risk of losing the person outweighs the risk of slow-burning resentment. The asymmetry tricks you into believing safety and stagnation are the same thing. It also makes you risk-blind to opportunity costs. You're so focused on not losing what you have that you don't see what you're already losing by not moving. A practical move that cuts through this. Next time you're sitting with a tough decision, flip it on its head. Ask yourself what you're losing by staying put, not just what you might lose by jumping. Ask what that dollar of growth is actually worth compared to protecting a dollar you already have. The numbers themselves won't shift, but your brain's algebra just did. That small reframe, from pure loss avoidance to seeing both sides of the equation clearly, is often enough to unstick you from the place where fear was calling all the shots. Framing effect in choices. You walk into a coffee shop and the barista says, "We have a new blend. It's made from beans that are 95% defect-free." You feel reassured, excited even. Same beans, different day, different barista. This blend has a 5% defect rate. Suddenly, you're hesitant. Both statements are mathematically identical. Your brain just heard them differently, and that tiny shift in language rewired your entire decision. That's the framing effect, and it runs your life more than you'd like to admit. A doctor tells one patient they have an 80% survival rate with surgery. Another patient hears that 20% don't survive. The first person often chooses surgery, the second often refuses, even though the odds are the same. Your choice didn't change because the facts changed. It changed because the frame changed. A frame is just the angle of the flashlight, but it decides what you see. The people 10 steps ahead of you, they know this works both ways. They frame their own decisions to nudge themselves toward better choices. They also spot when someone else is framing something to nudge them the wrong way. A salary offer framed as starting at $60K with room to grow hits different than capped at $75Ks. Same ceiling, different mood. Here's what matters. The frame is invisible until you look for it, but once you start catching them, when a company frames fast shipping instead of slow to arrive, when an app emphasizes you have X uses left instead of unlimited this month, you own the power. Start choosing your own frames. That's where the 10 steps open up. Decoy option manipulation. Walk into a movie theater and the ticket prices suddenly make sense. Small popcorn is $8, large is $9.50, medium sits between them at $8.75. Nobody actually wants the medium, right? It exists to make the large look like an unbeatable deal. That medium bucket is the decoy, and your brain stops trusting its own compass because the comparison itself was rigged before you even started. Dating apps hide mediocre profiles to make certain matches shine brighter. Insurance companies bundle an unrealistic mid-tier plan, so you skip it and buy the fancy one. Your salary negotiation includes a revised offer that makes the original look suddenly generous. The decoy doesn't need to be chosen. It just needs to exist, warping your sense of what's fair and valuable and worth your time. What makes this particularly sticky is that you feel autonomous the whole way through. Nobody forces you. You compare options and make what feels like a logical decision, but the comparison itself was the trap. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, it's working exactly as the architect wanted, weighing things against a phantom that was never meant to win. The real defense isn't complex. Before you commit something that costs real money or time, ask yourself if removing one option would actually change your mind about the others. If that middle option vanishes and you still want what you want, fine. But if its disappearance suddenly makes the expensive choice look less appealing, you've just caught someone's hand in your wallet. That tiny pause, that small question, it's your reset button. Choice architecture defaults. You walk into a coffee shop and the barista automatically starts pouring a medium without asking. That ease of not having to choose, that's the entire game of choice architecture playing out in real time. Defaults are invisible architects. They shape what you eat, how much you save, what you believe, and how much you move your body, all while you're busy thinking you're freely deciding. The unseen truth, most people believe they chose their life, but they inherited defaults instead. The path of least resistance, the option that was already selected, the norm nobody questioned. Your parents' money habits became your money habits. Your family's dinner time became when you eat. The workout class with the earliest slot became the one you actually go to, not because it's best for you, but because friction is the real decision maker. Here's where you pull ahead. Start noticing the defaults around you like they're written in highlighter. The browser that opens first, the playlist that auto starts, the lunch spot everyone drifts toward. Then ask the cold question, did I choose this? Or did the environment choose for me? You have more power than you realize. Reset your phone's default apps. Change which bank account your paycheck lands in first. Move the good snacks to eye level and the hard choices higher up. Small reversals of default gravity compound into massive life shifts over time. The person who controls the defaults controls the outcomes, and most people let unseen architects do it for them. You're already 10 steps ahead the moment you walk past that automatic medium and start asking why it was sitting there waiting. Paradox of too many options. You walk into a coffee shop with 42 varieties on the menu, 42, and somehow that abundance makes you miserable. You spend 10 minutes squinting, second-guessing, wondering if you picked wrong. Meanwhile, your friend orders from the 3-item place next door and sits down smiling before you've even decided. This is not a quirk. It's how your brain actually breaks under choice. When options multiply, decision-making doesn't improve. It collapses. Your confidence drops. Regret climbs. You start imagining all the roads you didn't take, all the better versions of the drink you could have chosen. Psychologists mapped this trap decades ago, but the real damage lives in the aftermath. Too many options don't just make you slower, they rewire how you evaluate anything at all. With 2 or 3 good paths, you feel decisive. With 50, you feel like every choice is somehow wrong because you can't be sure you optimized for maximum value. The trap deepens because more information doesn't help. It crystallizes doubt. You end up either paralyzed or resentful of whatever you pick because the sheer existence of alternatives poisons satisfaction. The people 10 steps ahead, they deliberately narrow their options before deciding. They cut the menu down to 5. They commit to a decision framework before the choice explosion happens. They know that fewer genuinely good options beat infinite mediocre ones every time. The quiet move. Before you stand in front of that choice, ask what would actually matter if you picked wrong. Usually the answer is almost nothing. That clarity collapses the whole paradox instantly. Zeigarnik open loops. Your brain despises a sentence cut off mid, "Wait, let me finish." See how that felt? That itch, that pull to know what comes next. That is the Zeigarnik effect in action, named after a Russian psychologist who noticed in the 1920s that people remember unfinished tasks far better than completed ones. Your memory doesn't file away loose threads. It flags them as urgent and keeps cycling them until closure arrives. Netflix knows this. Advertisers know this. The cliffhanger, the half-told story, the trailer that cuts right before the reveal, that is not accident, that is architecture. But here is the part that separates clear thinkers from scattered ones. Your own mind works exactly the same way, and most people never exploit it for themselves. Every unanswered email, every tab left open, every project started but not named or deadlined, it is a background process draining your focus in ways you cannot see. The mental friction costs far more than you realize, so the move is almost counterintuitive. Finish things fast or consciously release them. Do not leave half-read articles floating. Do not start what you will not touch for months. Do not leave a text hanging if you know it will replay in your head at midnight. Close the loop quickly or be honest that it is not happening and let it go entirely. This does not mean finishing everything today. It means giving your brain explicit permission to stop holding it open. Write it down, set a date, tell someone, anything that moves it from floating anxiety to handled thing. Your attention suddenly feels lighter and thought becomes sharp again. Peak end rule of memory. Last week, someone asked you about a 3-hour dinner and your brain didn't replay it minute by minute. It grabbed the worst moment, cold soup, awkward silence, and the last 5 minutes. Dessert was good, they hugged you goodbye, and called that the experience. Your memory isn't a video camera. It's a highlight reel written by someone who's bad at editing. You don't actually remember how things went overall. You remember how they peaked and how they ended. And those 2 moments get weighted so heavily that they can override 4 hours of neutral or even pleasant time. A brilliant weekend destroyed by one terrible argument on Sunday makes the whole thing feel like a waste. A mediocre meeting saved by a clear win in the final 5 minutes suddenly feels like progress. The gap between what happened and what you think happened lies entirely in those 2 moments. Here's what separates people who feel like they're winning from those who feel stuck. You can't control every moment, but you absolutely can engineer the peak and the end. That's why the best negotiators end on a handshake and a compliment. Why the smartest therapists save the last few minutes to ask, "And what's one thing we figured out today?" Why you remember restaurants where dessert was perfect more than restaurants where the entree was perfect. You're not remembering the meal. You're remembering two moments that outlived everything else. Start treating your day that way. Protect the ending, architect the peak, and watch how the whole thing shifts in the mirror of your own mind. Duration neglect. You sit through a dental procedure that takes 20 minutes. It's uncomfortable the whole time, but the last 2 minutes are sharp, really sharp. Weeks later, someone asks how bad it was, and you tell them it was awful, not because of the total time, but because of how it ended. That ending is now your entire memory of the event. Duration didn't matter, the peak moment did. This is duration neglect, and it rewires how you evaluate almost everything in your life without you noticing. A vacation where you have one mediocre final day doesn't feel like 10 good days plus one bad one. It collapses into that trip was kind of disappointing. A job you loved for 3 years feels ruined if the last conversation with your boss went wrong. You don't average the experience, you weight the ending and the worst moment like they're the whole story. Your brain isn't tracking hours or days or years, it's tracking peaks and endings, usually in that order. Here's what actually costs you. You're probably making decisions based on false memories. You avoid restaurants because you once had a rough ending to a meal there, ignoring the dozen times you left happy. You hesitate on relationships, jobs, hobbies, all because your brain stored a highlight reel instead of a fair summary. Before you write off an experience, ask yourself how much of that judgment comes from the last few minutes versus the whole arc. Then ask what actually happened most of the time, not the peak, the actual median. That's closer to the truth. Hedonic adaptation treadmill. You buy the thing you've wanted for months. For exactly 2 weeks, it's magic. You notice it every time, feel that small lift. Then one morning, you walk past it and feel nothing. That flatness is the treadmill. Your brain got the upgrade it wanted and instantly reset the baseline. The joy didn't disappear because the thing is bad. It disappeared because your nervous system is a creature that hungers for novelty, not contentment. New salary, new apartment, new relationship, they all follow the same curve. The high peaks, plateaus fast, and your brain starts scanning for the next fix. This is why people feel empty even after winning. Not because winning is hollow, but because winning, metabolically speaking, is a temporary interruption to the status quo. The trap deepens when you mistake this reset for proof that nothing really matters. So you chase bigger and bigger wins. Faster car, nicer house, higher title, but the treadmill just recalibrates again, exactly the same way. So here's the real lever. Instead of chasing the next upgrade, interrupt the adaptation by introducing variety within what you already have. Same coffee shop, but a different walk there. Same partner, but a conversation you've been avoiding. Same house, but a corner you redesign. Boredom is adaptation talking. It's your baseline trying to settle. Fighting it doesn't mean buying new things. It means introducing real novelty into the ordinary. The person who stays ahead isn't the one with the most stuff. It's the one who figures out how to stay awake to what they already have, and who knows that the game isn't about accumulation, it's about noticing. Effective forecasting error. You just got rejected and you're already rehearsing the script, telling friends it's fine, nodding through dinners while the ache settles in as your new permanent baseline. Your brain is painting a future where this feeling never leaves. But 6 months from now, you'll be surprised how much it faded. Not because time magically heals, but because you're spectacularly bad at predicting how much you'll actually adapt to anything. This is effective forecasting error, and it runs both directions like a broken compass. You imagine pain staying massive and sticky when it crumbles faster than you'd guess. You got the job and thought you'd float on golden feeling forever. 2 weeks in, you're already stressed about something else. You bought the house and imagined permanent safety. Now you're worried about the roof. Your mind overestimates how long emotions will haunt you and how deeply they'll consume your life. But the flip side is just as broken. You underestimate how quickly good feelings flatten into baseline. That wedding high, gone in weeks. That promotion buzz, absorbed like it never happened. Your brain treats feelings like permanent residents when they're actually tourists passing through. The trap is that you're making enormous decisions, burning bridges, abandoning good things, pivoting your whole life based on emotional weather reports you're getting completely backwards. Before you blow anything up, hold still for a second. The dread you feel right now about a decision is almost certainly twice as big as it will actually be after you make it. The hope you're clinging to, smaller. Your emotional forecast lies. Build that knowledge in before you move. Focusing illusion. You spend 3 months saving for a vacation. The trip arrives. You have the time of your life. Then you come home, and within 2 weeks, the glow is completely gone. It's just another memory tucked away. But here's what's wild. Before the trip, you genuinely believed this vacation would change your baseline happiness. You were certain. It didn't. This is focusing illusion at work. The tendency to overestimate how much any single event, possession, or circumstance will impact your overall life satisfaction. The trap runs deeper than travel. You think getting that promotion will fix everything. You'll finally be happy. You'll get the job, and yes, there's a spike, but then your brain resets and the old anxieties creep back in. Same with the apartment, the relationship status, the car. Your mind zooms in on one thing so hard that it becomes the entire horizon. You lose perspective on all the other factors that actually shape your day-to-day contentment. Your sleep, your friendships, whether you moved your body, what you had for lunch, the small rituals you've built or neglected. The people who stay ahead understand something quiet but essential. Major life changes rarely deliver what you think they will, so they don't hinge their whole emotional life on one outcome waiting to arrive. Instead, they track the small, boring stuff, the habits, the relationships, the consistency, because those are the real levers. When something big does happen, they enjoy it fully and consciously, but they're not waiting for it to save them. That waiting is what keeps most people stuck. Impact bias in expectations. You landed the promotion. For 3 days, you felt unstoppable. Then your brain recalibrated. The new salary was nice, but the added stress ate most of the lift, and by week 3, you were back to baseline happiness. This is impact bias. You wildly overestimate how long an event will change your emotional life. You think getting the thing will make you happy. You think losing it will crush you. The truth is far less dramatic. Our minds are prediction machines that are shockingly bad at their own job. We feel the delta, the gap between what we have and what we got, but we almost never account for hedonic adaptation, that invisible force that pulls us back to neutral. The trap deepens because you chase the next win believing it will stick, only to find yourself chasing again 6 months later. But here's where most people miss the edge. If you know this happens, you can stop wasting emotional currency on the wrong targets. You can stop choosing based on the fantasy of permanent happiness and start choosing based on what actually aligns with how you spend your time. Someone who knows they'll adapt back to baseline anyway chooses differently. They pick the promotion that has the best day-to-day texture, not the one with the biggest number attached. They pick the relationship that feels right now, not the one they imagine will complete them. The 10-step advantage is brutal and simple. Stop betting your contentment on external events. Build it somewhere steadier. Watch how differently you move when you stop believing the lie that the next thing will be different. Implementation intention scripting. You're standing in the kitchen at 7 p.m., tired, and your brain offers you the usual choice: order takeout or make something healthy. 9 times out of 10, tired, you loses. But here's the trap nobody tells you. Willpower in that moment isn't your real problem. The real problem is that you're deciding for the first time. Implementation intention scripting flips the script by having you decide before you're exhausted. You sit down with a clear head and write out a specific if-then rule. If I feel the 7 p.m. hunger hit, then I cook the sheet pan chicken I prepped Sunday. Not vague motivation, not hope, a locked-in script. Your brain stops treating it as a fresh choice and starts treating it as a fact, like brushing your teeth. The wild part? When you've scripted it, the friction drops so far that lazy, you just follows the script instead of fighting it. This works everywhere. Fitness. If I change into gym clothes, then I leave the house. Focus. If I sit at my desk, then I close all tabs but my work doc. Conversation. If someone contradicts me, then I pause before responding. You're not building willpower. You're automating the part of yourself that actually shows up. The people ahead of you aren't smarter or more disciplined. They've just removed the decision from moments when they're weak. Stop negotiating with yourself in the moment. Write your 3 biggest friction points and script them tonight. That's not motivation. That's architecture. Cue, routine, reward loop. You reach for your phone the moment you feel bored. No decision, just motion. That invisible 3-part machine running in the background is what separates people who drift through habits from people who architect them. Something triggers you, cue, you do something, routine, and your brain gets a hit of dopamine or relief, reward. After the loop fires a few times, it becomes automatic. You stop thinking and start doing. Most people try to break bad habits through pure willpower, but that's like trying to unplug a machine that's already wired into your nervous system. The real move is redesigning the loop itself. You can't delete the cue. Your phone will always exist. Boredom will always find you, but you absolutely can change what happens next. Instead of scrolling, grab water. Instead of stress eating, step outside for 2 minutes. The reward arrives faster than you expect. What separates people 10 steps ahead is that they don't just avoid traps. They build useful loops intentionally and relentlessly. A cue like morning coffee becomes your trigger to journal. The routine is 5 minutes of writing. The reward is clarity before your day even starts. After a week, you don't need motivation anymore. The loop runs itself, asking nothing from you. Most people are slaves to loops they never noticed being constructed in real time. The entire advantage lives here. Watch your own cues, audit what reward they're actually delivering, and engineer the routine in between. That's the whole game, and it's playing whether you're paying attention or not. Temptation bundling. You know that moment when you sit down to work and suddenly your phone is the only thing in the world that matters? That's not a character flaw. It's your brain obeying its wiring. Crave the hit now, chase the reward later. Temptation bundling is the cheat code that weaponizes this against itself. Pair something you dread with something you actually crave, and watch willpower stop being the gatekeeper. You don't white-knuckle through a workout. You exercise while binging the podcast you're obsessed with. You don't force yourself through spreadsheets. You tackle them at your favorite cafe with a pastry sitting right there. The trick isn't fooling yourself. It's that you've stopped fighting your own neurology. Your brain still gets its dopamine hit, just now it arrives hitched to the thing that moves your life forward. This works because willpower is a tank that empties. Every gritted teeth task drains fuel you need elsewhere. Bundle the friction with genuine pleasure, and you're not depleting anything. You're running on momentum. The catch is real. The pairing has to land like truth. Fake pleasant explodes. If podcasts actually bore you, gluing them to the gym just creates two miserable things at once. But when you find the actual pairing, the one where your nervous system lights up, you've basically installed autopilot for habits that used to require daily combat. The width of the gap between people who want to change and the ones who actually coast through it without thinking, that gap is often just one honest pairing away. Look at your most dreaded task right now and ask, what would make this bearable, maybe even magnetic? That's not motivation. That's architecture. Ulysses' contract pre-commitment. Imagine Odysseus lashing himself to the mast before the siren sang. He couldn't change his mind later because he'd already decided for a version of himself that didn't exist yet. That's the whole game right there. Most people think willpower is something you summon in the moment, but the sharpest move happens before temptation shows up. You tie your own hands deliberately. A Ulysses contract is pre-committing to something when you're still calm and rational, making it costly or impossible to bail when your brain gets foggy. Your future self will beg you to quit the gym. Your tired self will negotiate with the chocolate cake. So you don't leave it to the moment. You hand over your credit card to lock in the class, or you delete the app, or you tell your friend the specific number on the scale and ask her to call you out if you slack. The leverage shifts. Suddenly, the thing that felt optional becomes structural. You've removed your own escape hatch, and here's what makes it work. Your present rational self negotiates with your future irrational self by making promises you cannot easily break. It's not fighting temptation, it's building a cage that you consented to when you thought clearly. Everyone's fighting their impulses every single day. The people 10 steps ahead aren't stronger. They've just outsourced the decision to systems. They've made the hard choice once when the stakes were low and the voice inside was quiet, so they never have to make it again when the stakes get loud and the excuses start multiplying. That's the whole move. Friction as behavior design. Most of us treat friction like an enemy. Strip it away and everything flows better, right? Watch what actually happens when you remove all the bumps. Your brain stops treating a choice like a choice. You doom scroll for 3 hours and can't remember reaching for your phone. You buy things you didn't need because checkout felt like gravity. The moment you eliminate resistance, you've also eliminated intention. Smart people flip this. They add friction strategically to behaviors they want to keep, making them slightly harder to do by accident. Want to write more? Don't just crack open a blank document. Sit at a specific table, phone in another room, coffee ready. Want to eat better? Don't fill your kitchen with virtuous hope. Make junk food harder to grab than vegetables. This isn't punishment. It's architecture. You're building a tiny speed bump between impulse and action, which is exactly where conscious choice lives. The world is already engineered to make bad habits frictionless. Attention gets monetized that way. But when you design friction into your own life, you flip the power. Suddenly, you're not fighting your willpower, you're fighting physics, and physics doesn't negotiate. The highest performers aren't the ones with iron discipline. They're the ones who made discipline irrelevant by making the right move slightly costlier than the wrong one. Your brain knows the difference between a habit that slides in easy and one that requires you to show up. One feels accidental, the other feels chosen. Start with one behavior, one friction point, 1 week, and let the system do the work. 2-minute activation rule. You know that moment when you're scrolling at midnight, thinking about the email you should send or the workout you meant to do, and instead you just don't? Your brain has already decided it's too late, too hard, too much friction. What most people don't realize is that the decision to act isn't made when you're fully energized. It's made in that 2-minute window right when the thought lands. If you wait for motivation to arrive like a friend at a party, you're already lost. The rule is simple. The moment you feel a pull towards something that matters, you have exactly 2 minutes to move your body in that direction, not to finish it, not to do it perfectly, just to activate. Send the first sentence of that email. Put on your shoes. Open the document. Call the person back. The activation itself is the hardest part, and it takes roughly 90 seconds to 2 minutes before your nervous system shifts from I should to I'm doing. After that threshold, momentum takes over in ways your willpower never could. The trick works because you're not negotiating with yourself about the whole project, you're just asking for 2 minutes of forward motion. Your brain can't argue with that. Once you're moving, the resistance collapses. This is why people who win at life aren't necessarily more disciplined. They're faster at closing the gap between thought and action. They've learned to trust the 2-minute window like a life raft. The next time you feel something pull at you, stop counting reasons and start counting seconds instead. Deliberate practice feedback loop. You've probably spent hours on something, writing, speaking, a skill at work, and felt like you were spinning your wheels. The hours piled up, but the needle barely moved. That's because most practice is just repetition with no mirror. Deliberate practice feedback loop is different. It's the moment you stop doing something, look at what actually happened versus what you intended, and adjust the next attempt based on that gap. Think of a tennis player who films every serve, watches it, and notices their toss drifts 2 inches left. Next serve, toss corrects. That's the loop. Without the film, they'd never know. Without noticing, they'd never change. The trap most people fall into is they confuse time spent with improvement. 10 years of the same mistake feels like expertise. But expertise only builds when you have real-time feedback, ideally from someone who can see your blind spots, or at minimum from honest data about whether you hit the target or missed it. At work, this means asking specifically what went wrong in that pitch, not just accepting it didn't land. In learning, it means testing yourself instead of rereading notes. The people who pull ahead aren't the ones working harder. They're the ones who've wired their practice to correct course. They close the gap between effort and result so fast that a few months of intentional loops beats years of blind repetition. Here's the move. Find one skill you're building right now and add one feedback checkpoint today. Someone's input, a metric, a test. That single addition compounds faster than you'd expect. Desirable difficulty in learning. You know that feeling when you breeze through a chapter and feel brilliant, then blank completely on the test? That smooth read was a trap. Your brain was too comfortable, and comfort is the opposite of learning. Real neural change happens when you're slightly confused, when you have to work to pull a memory back up, when the material resists you a little. Neuroscientist Robert Bjork calls this desirable difficulty, the gap between what feels easy and what actually sticks. When you reread a chapter, your brain gets drunk on familiarity. When you close the book and try to recall it cold, you build the pathways that matter. That lag time before the answer comes, that friction, that's where the actual work lives. But here's the trap. Your brain hates this and lies to you about it. It loves the illusion of mastery, the warm glow of recognition. So most people study in ways that feel productive but don't work. Highlighting, rereading, watching someone else solve the problem. Instead, space your review over days. Test yourself hard, use different contexts to practice the same idea, force retrieval before you peek at the answer. This is why most people plateau while others keep climbing. The ones pulling ahead aren't smarter. They've learned to read difficulty as a signal that something real is happening, not a red flag to switch to easier material. When learning feels smooth, you're entertaining yourself. When it feels hard, you're changing. Your nervous system will protest. Let it anyway. Make discomfort your teacher and watch what sticks. Spacing effect over cramming. You cram for a test the night before and nail it. 2 weeks later, someone asks you the same question and your mind goes blank. That's not laziness. That's how memory actually works, and most people never learn this rule. Your brain doesn't store information like a hard drive. It strengthens memories through time gaps and retrieval attempts. When you study something once in a marathon session, your neurons fire in a tight cluster, memorable in the moment, gone within days. When you study the same thing across multiple sessions separated by days or weeks, something different happens. Each time you revisit it, your brain has to reconstruct the memory, and that rebuilding process is what makes it stick. The intervals matter most. A day apart works better than an hour apart. A week apart works better than a day. This is the spacing effect, and it sounds slower, but it's actually faster learning disguised as slower learning. You spend less total time and retain exponentially more. The person who spends 30 minutes on something once a week will outpace someone who spends 3 hours in one sitting every single time. Structure your life around retrieval instead. Review notes once, then 3 days later, then a week later. Read a book, then revisit key ideas after time has passed. Have real conversations with people weeks after meeting them, not just once. The gap is not wasted time, it's the engine. Stop treating your brain like a bucket and start treating it like a muscle that needs rest between workouts. Testing effect retrieval. You know that feeling when you cram for an exam, ace it, then forget everything 2 weeks later? That's the opposite of what happens when you actually test yourself during learning. Here's the twist. Your brain doesn't consolidate information just from reading or reviewing it. It consolidates information when you have to pull it back out from memory, even if you get it wrong. That struggle, that momentary blank before the answer clicks, is literally your neural pathways rewiring themselves. The act of retrieval is the storage mechanism. So if you're highlighting notes or rereading chapters, you're basically wasting the fuel. You're preparing your brain to recognize the answer, not remember it. The real work happens when you close the book and ask yourself, what did I just learn? Blank stare? Even better. That confusion is where the learning lives. This is why people who quiz themselves, do practice problems, or teach someone else what they've learned actually retain it. They're not being virtuous, they're triggering the neurochemical conditions their memory needs. The person ahead of you isn't smarter, they're using retrieval every single day. They test themselves on their skills, ideas, and knowledge gaps before they ever need them. You could spend 2 hours reading about negotiation or 15 minutes trying to recall and apply what you read. 15 minutes wins. Finish a podcast and pause to tell yourself what stuck. Read an article and write 1 sentence about the core idea before scrolling. That tiny act of pulling information out hardens it in place. The gap between forgetting and ownership lives in that one decision to retrieve. Interleaving over blocking. You walk into a music lesson and the teacher says, spend the next hour drilling scale patterns. Same fingering, same motion, locked in. It feels productive. Your brain gets warm. Then next week you play a real song and nothing transfers. Your fingers freeze when the context shifts. This is blocking, and it is a lie your brain tells you about learning. Interleaving is the opposite, mixing up your practice. 1 scale, then a different key, then a tricky passage, then back to the first scale, but faster. It feels choppy. It feels less fluent in the moment. Your brain hates it. And that friction is exactly why it works. When you force your brain to switch contexts, you're not just repeating a skill. You are building the decision-making muscle that matters. A doctor who drills 1 diagnosis all day might miss that diagnosis in a real patient. A writer who outlines 10 chapters in a row loses the feel of switching tone mid-essay. Your brain needs to practice not just what you are doing, but when to know you should be doing it. Here is the practical twist. If you are studying, do not block your subjects by topic. Mix them. Problem from chapter 3, then 1 from chapter 7. Language vocab mixed with grammar drills. Sales objections shuffled, not stacked. It slows you down during practice. It speeds you up everywhere else. The person who blocks learns faster in a narrow lane. The person who interleaves learns slower but wider. And wider is where real advantage lives in the long game. Generation effect. You crammed the night before an exam, reading the same paragraph 5 times and blanked on it in week 3. That's passive absorption doing what it does worst. But flip to a moment you had to explain something to a friend, or teach it, or write it in your own words. And it was suddenly there. Your brain didn't work harder, it worked differently. When you generate the answer yourself instead of just receiving it, memory doesn't file it away like a document in a drawer. It embeds it like a scar. This is the generation effect, and it runs everywhere. Learning a language, picking up a skill, remembering why you walked into a room. The effort of retrieving or creating the information doesn't just store it, it rewires how your neurons talk to each other. A lecturer can fill an hour and you'll lose it by lunch. But ask yourself questions about that hour. Write what you learned or solve a problem using it, and the material becomes yours in a way that feels involuntary. Your brain made more connections, locked it deeper. The move that puts you 10 steps ahead isn't memorizing more. It's forcing yourself to produce. Ask yourself questions instead of scrolling answers. Write your thoughts instead of just thinking them. Teach someone else instead of watching tutorials on repeat. That friction, that small muscle of generation, is exactly what most people sidestep because it feels slower. It's why they forget. You know the shortcut now. Curse of knowledge in teaching. You know how to tie your shoes. Your fingers just move. Now imagine trying to explain that same motion to someone who's never seen laces before, and you keep getting frustrated because they're not getting it. That frustration is the curse of knowledge. Once you've mastered something, your brain literally forgets what it felt like not to know it. The steps became invisible to you. When you teach, you skip rungs on the ladder without realizing it. You jump from A to D because your brain compressed B and C into muscle memory years ago. The person listening is stuck, confused, blaming themselves for being slow when really they're missing the invisible steps. This matters everywhere. Explaining your job to a new hire, teaching your partner a skill, writing instructions, even debugging why someone misunderstood you. The trick is to reverse engineer your own knowledge. Ask yourself, what did I have to learn first? What confused me back then? What tiny assumption am I making right now that would blow someone else's mind? When you're tempted to say, just do it this way, that's your signal to pause and get granular. Show the messy middle. Name the small decisions. Explain why you're doing step 3, not just how. The people you teach fastest will remember you not because you're smart, but because you remembered what it felt like to be stuck. That rare skill, the willingness to reverse the view from inside your own mastery and rebuild it step by small step, puts you miles ahead of anyone who assumes everyone sees what they see. Feynman explanation test. Richard Feynman had a trick he used on himself whenever he thought he understood something. He'd try to explain it to a stranger, not a smart stranger, a blank one. No jargon, no shortcuts, no assuming they'd fill in the gaps. The moment he stumbled, reached for a term, or felt the explanation collapse, he knew where his understanding actually ended. That friction, that's gold. Most of us skip this step entirely. We read something, nod, feel the glow of recognition, and move on. But recognition is not the same as knowing. When you're alone later and need that idea, it evaporates because you never actually held it. The test strips away the illusion of comprehension like nothing else can. Try it right now with something you think you understand. Maybe how an algorithm works, or why a relationship ended, or how your own ambition functions. Explain it like your 8-year-old version of you is listening. No technical words. No, it's complicated. Watch how quickly you find the holes in what you thought was solid ground. The genius part is this. Those holes are your next edges to sharpen. Everyone else is comfortable in their fog, thinking they know. You're the one actually finding out what's missing, what lives in the dark corners of your thinking. That separation between feeling knowledgeable and actually holding knowledge, that's the 10-step difference right there. Not smarter. More honest with yourself about the gaps. Next time you learn something, resist the urge to celebrate understanding yet. Explain it simply first. The real knowing always comes after. Illusion of explanatory depth. You know how a zipper works, right? You pull the slider, teeth interlock, fabric closes, solid understanding. Now try explaining exactly how the teeth grip each other at the atomic level, or why that particular angle of engagement holds so perfectly. You'll hit a wall fast. That wall is the illusion of explanatory depth. The gap between what you think you understand and what you actually understand. We all live inside this gap without knowing it. You feel confident about politics because you've read headlines. You have opinions on vaccines because someone explained it once. You understand why your relationship ended because you've told the story 100 times. But ask yourself the hard follow-up questions, and suddenly the ground gets soft. The teeth don't interlock the way you imagined. The story has plot holes you never noticed. This matters because people who overestimate their own understanding rarely learn. They defend bad positions fiercely. They interrupt more. They're slower to spot their own mistakes. Meanwhile, people who stay curious, who ask themselves, do I actually know this or just know the label? They move through the world spotting real leverage points everyone else misses. The real move is deceptively simple. Next time you feel certain about something, try explaining it to someone who doesn't share your background without using jargon or shortcuts. Watch what happens. Most certainties collapse into, I know it feels true within minutes. That collapse is where real learning begins and where the people 10 steps ahead already live. Dunning-Kruger competence blindness. The best liar in the room is usually the one who just learned something last week. You know the type. They took one course, read a Reddit thread, watched a TikTok explainer, and now they're explaining your field to you with absolute certainty, betting their reputation on half knowledge. Here's the brutal joke. They're not being arrogant on purpose. They're actually blind. When you're incompetent at something, you lack the knowledge framework to even see how much you don't know. It's like asking someone who's never played chess to evaluate a grandmaster's move. They can't perceive the depth of what they're missing. The actual expert sits quietly instead, because each new skill reveals another gap, another terrain unmarked. So competence feels like uncertainty and incompetence feels like conviction. This is why confidence and ability often move in opposite directions. The trap isn't just that people overestimate themselves, it's that they're stuck in a perceptual cage, unable to read the map of their own ignorance because they don't have the vocabulary yet. But here's your edge. When you feel absolutely sure about something, pause and ask someone 3 steps ahead of you. Notice if your certainty is actually inversely correlated with how much you've actually studied. Watch for that flush of knowing that feels total before you've built the foundation. The people who stay ahead don't mistake their first taste of competence for the real thing. They treat every answer as the start of a much longer question, and they stay curious instead of certain. Imposter calibration gap. You get the promotion and immediately think they made a mistake. Someone competent will discover you soon. Meanwhile, your quiet coworker who patches problems together with duct tape and guesses walks around certain he's brilliant. Neither of you is measuring against reality. You're measuring against a private, invisible standard that has nothing to do with what you actually produce. That gap between how good you feel and how good you actually are is the calibration gap, and it's running your life in ways you don't see. High performers tend to know more about what they don't know. They can see all the gaps, all the ways things could fail, all the shortcuts they took, so they feel small. Meanwhile, people who've never sat with complexity long enough to understand it stay confident because they think they've figured it out. They don't know what they don't know, and that ignorance feels like mastery. Here's the shift that changes things. If you feel like a fraud, you're probably closer to actual competence than you think. Your self-doubt is calibrated to a real standard. The trick is not to kill the doubt. Doubt keeps you honest and sharp, but to stop letting it veto your decisions. You can feel unsure and still be the right person for the room. You can be learning and still be leading. The people who actually get ahead fastest are rarely the ones who feel most certain. They're the ones who learned to act despite the gap, not wait until it closed. And here's the quiet truth. It never does. Fundamental attribution error. Your colleague snaps at you in a meeting. Your brain instantly decides they're rude, impatient, disrespectful. Meanwhile, you have no idea their kid woke up at 4 a.m., their partner just told them about a health scare, or they haven't slept properly in 3 days. You saw behavior and invented character. That gap between what you observe and why it actually happened is where fundamental attribution error lives, and it's costing you relationships, opportunities, and daily peace. Here's the real twist. You never do this to yourself. When you're snappy, you know instantly that you're stressed or tired or overwhelmed. You know context, but when someone else is snappy, you skip the context entirely and go straight to blame. Psychologists call this the actor-observer bias, and it runs deep because your brain is lazy. Assuming someone is just like that takes zero work. Imagining their whole invisible world takes energy you didn't budget for. The people who move 10 steps ahead flip this. They assume context first. That driver who cut them off? Probably rushing to something urgent. That boss who didn't reply? Drowning in something you can't see. That friend who canceled plans? Not selfish, just overwhelmed. This doesn't mean excusing actual bad behavior, but it means you stop building stories out of thin air and start asking questions instead. The moment you do, you get better information, better relationships, and you stop wasting mental energy on fiction. The shift doesn't come easy because your brain will fight this habit, protective and stubborn, but people who build real influence know something. Assume invisible pressure first, judgment second. That one reframe changes how others feel around you. Actor-observer asymmetry. Your coworker snaps at you in a meeting and you think, "What a rude person." You snap at someone later and you know it's because you didn't sleep well, your kid was sick, the commute destroyed you. Same behavior, two different stories, and you just watched actor-observer asymmetry in real time. When you do something, you see the whole context, your situation, your constraints, the bad day that led there. When someone else does it, you see their character. You see them as the problem, not their circumstances. This matters because it's automatic and invisible. Your brain does it faster than you can catch it. A friend cancels plans and you feel hurt. They're flaky, they don't value us. But when you cancel, you have reasons. An unexpected call, a migraine, something came up. You're not flaky. Circumstances happened. The asymmetry is so natural that you can go years blaming people's personalities for things that are really just bad timing or invisible pressure they're carrying. And here's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't just poison your judgments, it poisons your relationships. People feel blamed for things outside their control, while you feel misunderstood for the same type of thing. The resentment builds because you're operating in different worlds. You live in a universe of reasons. They live in a world of your rigid conclusions about who they are. When someone acts in a way that bothers you, pause and ask what invisible pressure they might be under, not to excuse bad behavior, but to see them the way you see yourself. That shift alone will change how many people want to stay in your life. Hanlon's razor of intent. Your coworker didn't reply to your email. Your partner forgot your birthday. Your friend laughed at something you said. Your immediate instinct is to construct a narrative. They don't respect you. They don't care. They were mocking you. But here's what most people miss. You are building a villain story out of incomplete data. Hanlon's razor says never attribute to malice what can adequately be explained by incompetence, distraction, or simple human limitation. The person who hurt you was probably not thinking about you at all. That might sting worse than intentional cruelty because it means you were just not on their radar. This is actually your advantage. Most people waste enormous emotional energy prosecuting invisible crimes, constructing elaborate proof of betrayal from a missed text or a delayed response. You could do the same, or you could ask a simpler question first. What's the least damaging explanation that fits the facts? Did they forget? Were they overwhelmed? Did they misunderstand? 9 times out of 10, the boring answer is true. And the moment you stop assuming malice, 2 things happen. First, you stop poisoning your own mood with stories that live only in your head. Second, you become weirdly unshakable because you're not waiting for proof of rejection that may never come. This doesn't mean letting people treat you badly. Boundaries still matter. And patterns matter. It means you spend your mental energy on what's actually happening, not on the ghost story you've written in the dark. Naive realism. 2 people stand in the same room watching the same argument unfold and walk away convinced of completely opposite truths. both certain they saw what actually happened. Your brain doesn't broadcast reality. It broadcasts a heavily curated version filtered through past hurt, tribal pulls, the sources you unconsciously gravitate toward, expectations baked in so deep you forgot they were there. You experience this edited film so directly, so immediately, that it feels like pure seeing, like you're just reading what's objectively in front of you. Your certainty feels like evidence. Meanwhile, the person across from you is having that exact same unshakable conviction about their totally different world, and they feel just as grounded in fact as you do. Naive realism is the quiet belief that your perception is transparent, that when you see something, you see it untouched by interpretation, but there's no untouched seeing. The trap isn't that you're stupid or willfully blind. It's that certainty and accuracy feel identical from the inside. Smart people don't escape this. They learn to catch the moment when total conviction shows up, because that's usually when the editing is thickest. The move is smaller than it sounds. Next time you're absolutely sure about someone's motives or what actually happened, pause and ask, what would I have to be missing for their version to make sense? What experience, what context, what pain am I not seeing from where I'm standing? That question is the crack where your curated story meets actual reality. That's where you find ground. Typical mind fallacy. You meet someone who doesn't like coffee, and part of you thinks they're being difficult, like they're rejecting something everyone else gets. Your nervous system feels normal to you because it's the only one you've ever lived in, so you treat it as the template everyone else was supposed to follow. When someone reacts differently, processes fear or joy or motivation in a way that doesn't match your wiring, you interpret that gap as them being broken rather than just being different. You miss entire categories of human experience because you're looking at the world through a single lens. Some people think in pictures, some in words, some in pure feeling. Some brains seek novelty obsessively, others crave routine like it's oxygen. Some people's anxiety is actually useful fuel, others is pure noise. Some minds light up solving abstract problems, some come alive in the physical world. The dangerous part is that this feels like common sense. Your psychology feels so neutral, so obvious that it disguises itself as truth. You're not being cruel when you judge someone for not wanting what you want. You're just not seeing what you're actually doing. The smart move is catching yourself mid-judgment, especially when someone genuinely baffles you, and asking instead, what does their nervous system actually need? What does success look like from inside their head, not from inside yours? Fluency feels like truth. You hear a name twice in 1 week and suddenly it feels familiar, trustworthy, real, even if you've never checked whether it's true. That's fluency at work, and it's running your life more than you know. When something slides smoothly into your brain, when the words rhyme or the rhythm lands just right, your mind whispers, this must be right. It must be true. But fluency is just how easy something is to process, not whether it's actually correct. A lie told with confidence sounds more true than a quiet fact. A repeated claim feels more solid than a fresh idea, even if the fresh idea is better. Madison Avenue knows this. Politicians know this. Your own memory tricks you with it every single day. You'll remember the gist of something you read years ago, but your brain will smooth out the rough edges and fill in the gaps with what feels natural, and you'll swear you remember it that way. The trap is this: the smoother something slides in, the less you question it. A simple, well-packaged idea travels faster than a complicated truth that requires work to understand. So people mistake elegance for accuracy. They mistake repetition for evidence. They mistake a good story for a good argument. Here's the move that changes things. The next time something feels obviously true, pause. Ask yourself, do I believe this because I've actually verified it, or because it just feels easy to think? The uncomfortable ones, the ideas that require real effort to hold, those might be closer to what's actually happening. Easy isn't always right. Mere exposure familiarity. You've heard a song exactly 3 times and hated it. By week 4, you're humming it. By week 6, it's your favorite. Nothing about the song changed. Your brain just got comfortable with it. That comfort is the mere exposure effect, and it's running your preferences right now in ways you don't fully see. The more you encounter something, a face, a name, a brand, an idea, the more your brain interprets familiarity as likability. It's not rational, it's neurochemical. Your nervous system treats known as safe, and safe feels good. This is why politicians repeat their names endlessly, why billboards work even though you hate billboards, why you marry someone who was in your class for 4 years before you noticed them romantically. The trick is this: people and brands that surround you win not because they're better, but because proximity creates preference. If you want to sell someone on an idea, show up repeatedly. If you want to buy time before deciding if you like something, give it exposure. Here's the brutal part nobody talks about. If you're trying to persuade someone fast, know that their resistance softens each time they see you. Conversely, if you dislike someone and keep running into them, that dislike can flip to fondness after enough encounters. The person you're trying to avoid becomes the person you're weirdly drawn to. The rule is simple and relentless. Familiarity is a lever. Repeated presence beats better arguments every single time. Use it consciously, or it uses you.